In the sleepy village of St. Mary Mead, where secrets hide behind lace curtains, a scream shatters the dawn. Ruby Keene, a dazzling dancer with dreams too big for her sequined gown, lies dead in Gossington Hall's library, her body twisted in a grotesque tableau. Why here, in the home of the respectable Bantrys, who staged this macabre scene, and what do they want? A single pearl earring glints beside her, its twin missing. Where is it, and who took it? Days later, a second body, young Pamela Harper, burns in a quarry's stolen car, her Girl Guide badge scorched but defiant. Are these murders linked, or is a darker force at play? A ticket stub to Dannymoth, a forged letter accusing Colonel Bantry, a hidden will, and a dancer's double scene laughing at midnight. Each clue is a thread in a deadly web. Who is the man in the dark coat, slipping through shadows from the majestic hotel to London's smoky theatres? Why did Ruby threaten to stay quiet no longer? And what did Pamela see in the woods that cost her life? Miss Jane Marple, with her knitting needles and razor-sharp mind, steps into the fray, unravelling a conspiracy of greed, betrayal, and revenge. But as she pulls each thread, the metal clasp, the red scarf, the forged page, she edges closer to a killer who watches her every move. Can she untangle the truth before the web tightens around her? In twisted body mystery, every whisper hides a lie, and every answer births a question. Who spun this web, and will they strike again? Chapter 1. The Shocking Discovery. The morning sun crept over the rolling hills of St. Mary Mead, casting a golden glow on the ivy-clad walls of Gossington Hall. Inside, the house was still, save for the faint clink of china as Mary, the Bantry's young maid, prepared the breakfast tray. The clock in the hall chimed 7, its echo reverberating through the polished oak corridors. Mary, barely 20, with a nervous habit of tucking her auburn curls behind her ear, hummed softly to herself. It was a tune she'd heard at the village fair, one that lingered like a half-remembered dream. Today, though her melody faltered as she pushed open the heavy door to the library, the room was dim, the curtains still drawn, and a faint musty scent of old books hung in the air. Mary set the tray on a side table, her eyes adjusting to the shadows. She moved to draw the curtains, her footsteps muffled on the thick Persian rug. Then she froze. A scream tore from her throat, sharp and jagged, shattering the morning's peace. There, sprawled across the rug, was a bardier young woman, her limbs twisted at unnatural angles, as if she'd been dropped like a marionette with cut strings. Her sequined evening dress, a garish shade of emerald, glittered incongruously in the gloom. Blonde hair fanned out around her head, matted with something dark and sticky. Her face, caked with smeared rouge and lipstick, bore an expression of frozen surprise, one blue eye staring blankly at the ceiling. A single pearl earring dangled from her left ear, its twin missing. Mary stumbled back, her hand clutching the curtain. "Oh Lord, no," she whispered, her voice trembling. She bolted from the room, her screams echoing down the hall. "Mrs. Bantry, Colonel, come quick." Upstairs, Dolly Bantry was brushing her silver-streaked hair when Mary's cries reached her. She dropped the brush, her heart lurching. Colonel Arthur Bantry, still in his dressing gown, was halfway through his morning tea when he heard the commotion. He leaped to his feet, nearly knocking over the Wedgwood teapot. "What in blazes?" he muttered, striding toward the stairs. Dolly reached the library first, her sensible slippers slapping against the floor. She stopped short at the threshold, her hand flying to her mouth. "Arthur, don't, oh heavens, don't look." But the Colonel was already behind her, his face paling as he took in the scene. "Good God," he said, his voice low. "Who is she?" "I haven't the foggiest," Dolly replied, her tone brisk despite the tremor in her hands. "But she's dead, and in our library. This is going to be the talk of St. Mary Mead for years." Arthur stepped closer, his military bearing faltering as he studied the girl. "She's young, barely 20, I'd wager. That dress, it's not the sort you see around here. Looks like something from a London nightclub." Dolly's eyes narrowed. "Don't get too close, Arthur. You'll muss up whatever clues are there. We need someone with a sharp mind for this." She turned, her decision made. "Mary, stop sniffling and fetch Miss Marple. She's the only one who can make sense of this before the village turns it into a circus." Mary, still trembling, nodded and dashed out the front door, her apron flapping. Dolly turned to her husband. "And you, Arthur, don't touch a thing, not a single thing." The Colonel raised an eyebrow. "I wasn't planning to, Dolly. I'm not a complete fool." "Debatable," she muttered, but her lips twitched with a fleeting smile. Miss Jane Marple arrived 20 minutes later, her black lace-up shoes crunching on the gravel drive. At 74, she was a slight figure, her white hair neatly pinned beneath a modest hat, her eyes sharp as a hawk's behind her spectacles. She carried a wicker basket, as if she'd been interrupted mid-morning errands, and her knitted shawl was draped over her shoulders against the autumn chill. Mary trailed behind her, wringing her hands. "Thank you, Mary," Miss Marple said gently, patting the girl's arm. "Now, go have a cup of tea. You've had a shock." Mary nodded, her eyes red-rimmed, and scurried toward the kitchen. Miss Marple stepped into the hall, where Dolly was waiting, her face a mix of exasperation and relief. "Jane, thank heavens you're here," Dolly said, ushering her toward the library. "It's ghastly, a dead girl, right in our house. Don't know her from Eve, and neither does Arthur, though he's acting like he's seen a ghost." Miss Marple's lips curved faintly. "Arthur does have a knack for looking guilty when he's merely confused. Now, let's see this poor soul." The library was as Mary had left it, the curtains now drawn to let in the pale morning light. The body lay unchanged, a stark contrast to the room's orderly shelves and leather-bound volumes. Miss Marple set her basket on a chair and approached the girl, her movements deliberate. She knelt, careful not to disturb the rug, and studied the scene with a quiet intensity. "Curious," she murmured, her eyes tracing the girl's twisted limbs. "She wasn't killed here, I think. The way she's positioned, it's too deliberate, like a stage set." Dolly frowned. "What do you mean, Jane? She's dead, isn't she?" "Oh, quite dead," Miss Marple replied, her voice soft but certain. "But look at her hands clenched, yet no signs of a struggle. And this dress." She leaned closer, inspecting the sequined fabric. "It's cheap, but new. Not the sort of thing one wears to a quiet village like ours." Arthur, hovering near the fireplace, cleared his throat. Could she have wandered in from somewhere? A vagrant, perhaps. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. A vagrant in a sequined gown and one pearl earring. "No, Arthur, she was brought here. And that earring." She pointed to the dangling pearl, its luster catching the light. "It's real, not costume jewelry, yet its twin is missing. That's significant, I dare say." Dolly crossed her arms. "Significant how? Honestly, Jane, you see clues in everything. And everything is a clue, Dolly," Miss Marple said, rising to her feet. "This girl was placed here deliberately, But why this library? Why your home? Arthur shifted uncomfortably. You don't think someone's trying to point the finger at us, do you? Miss Marple didn't answer directly. Instead, she circled the body, her gaze lingering on the smeared makeup. Her face, she said softly. The rouge is uneven, as if applied in haste or by someone else, and there's a faint bruise on her wrist, barely visible. She was handled roughly, but not here, Dolly shuddered. You're giving me chills, Jane. What do we do now? We wait for the police, Miss Marple said, her tone calm. But first, I'd like to speak to Mary again. She saw the body first, and young girls notice things they don't always realize are important. Mary was in the kitchen, clutching a chipped teacup when Miss Marple found her. Mrs. Eccles, the cook, was bustling about, muttering about ghastly goings-on and the inconvenience of a corpse before breakfast. Miss Marple sat across from Mary, her expression kind but probing. Now, Mary, she began, tell me exactly what you saw when you entered the library. Every detail, no matter how small. Mary's hands trembled, sloshing tea onto the table. I was bringing the tray, like always. The room was dark, and I went to open the curtains. Then I saw her lying there, all twisted up. I thought she was asleep at first, but her eyes, she swallowed hard. They were open, staring. At nothing, Miss Marple nodded. And the room itself. Anything out of place. Mary frowned, her brow furrowing. Well, the window was open a crack. I noticed because it was chilly, and the Colonel always complains about drafts. I shut it before I saw her. Miss Marple's eyes sharpened. An open window. Interesting. Anything else? There was a smell, Mary said hesitantly. Not just the books, but something. Sharp, like perfume, but wrong. I can't explain it. Perfume, Miss Marple repeated, her mind turning. And did you touch anything, Mary? No, miss. I dropped the tray and ran. I swear I didn't go near her. Miss Marple patted her hand. You did well, my dear. Now try to rest. As Mary sipped her tea, Miss Marple returned to the library, where Dolly was pacing. Well, Dolly demanded, what did she say? The window was open, Miss Marple said, crossing to the sash window in question. She examined the latch, her fingers tracing the frame. No signs of forced entry, but it's been opened recently. And Mary mentioned a sharp smell, possibly perfume. Dolly wrinkled her nose. Perfume in my library? That's absurd. Not absurd, Miss Marple said. Significant. Perfume lingers, Dolly. It tells us someone was here, someone who didn't belong. The police arrived shortly after, led by Inspector Slack, a wiry man with a perpetual scowl and a penchant for barking orders. His constables cordoned off the library, and a doctor confirmed the girl had been dead for several hours, likely strangled. Elsewhere, and moved to Gossington Hall. Slack eyed the Bantries with suspicion, his notebook snapping shut like a trap. Colonel Bantry, he said, care to explain why a dead girl ends up in your house? Arthur bristled. I've no idea, Inspector. I was asleep until Mary screamed. Slack's gaze shifted to Dolly. And you, Mrs. Bantry? Any late-night visitors? Dolly's eyes flashed. If I had visitors, Inspector, they wouldn't be dead in my library. Really, this is outrageous, Miss Marple interjected, her voice mild. Inspector, might I suggest examining the girl's shoes? They're clean, despite the gravel drive outside. She didn't walk here. Slack blinked, momentarily thrown. Right, we'll check that. He turned to his men, barking orders to photograph the scene. As the police worked, Miss Marple drew Dolly aside. This is no random act, Dolly. Someone chose your library for a reason. We must find out who this girl was and why she was brought here. Dolly sighed. You're right, Jane, but where do we start? Miss Marple's eyes gleamed with the earring. One is here, but where is the other? And that perfume Mary mentioned, a thread we must follow. This poor girl was placed here deliberately, but why this library? The chapter ends with the police bustling about, their voices a low hum as Miss Marple stands by the window, her gaze distant. The mystery of the twisted. The body has only begun to unravel, and already the quiet village of St. Mary Mead feels a little less safe. Chapter 2. The Village Whispers. The morning after the grim discovery in Gossington Hall's library. St. Mary Mead buzzed with a fervour that rivaled the annual flower show. By 9 o'clock, the news of the dead girl in the Bantry's home had spread like wildfire, carried on the tongues of milkmen, postmen, and early risers queuing at the bakery. The village, usually content with gossip about misplaced laundry or Mrs. Price's overbaked scones, now thrummed with a darker excitement. At the heart of it all was Miss Jane Marple, who sat in the Bluebell tea-room, her knitting needles clicking softly as she listened to the chatter swirling around her. The tea-room, with its lace curtains and mismatched china, was the village's unofficial parliament. Today it was packed. Mrs. Hartnell, a stout woman with a penchant for loud hats, held court at a corner table, her voice carrying over the clink of teacups. I said to my Henry, it's no coincidence, a body like that, in the Bantry's library. That girl was trouble, mark my words. All sequins and lipstick, probably one of those modern types from the city. Miss Weatherby, a thin, bird-like spinster, leaned forward, her eyes gleaming. But who was she? That's what I want to know. Nobody in St. Mary Mead dresses like that. I heard she's from the Majestic Hotel, one of those dance girls. Miss Marple's needles paused, her gaze drifting to the window where the autumn leaves skittered across the cobbled street. The Majestic Hotel, a gaudy establishment 5 miles away, was known for its weekend dancers and transient clientele. It was a plausible lead, but Miss Marple's mind lingered on the nervous glance she'd caught from Mr. Pye, the florist, who sat alone at a table by the door. His hands fidgeted with a teaspoon, and his eyes darted toward the conversation whenever the dead girl was mentioned. Mrs. Clement, the vicar's wife, joined the discussion, her voice softer but no less eager. I heard from Constable Reed that the police identified her. Ruby Keene, they say. A performer at the Majestic. Poor thing, only 18. Ruby Keene, Mrs. Hartnell's eyebrows shot up. Sounds like a stage name to me. No decent girl would have a name like that. Miss Marple's lips twitched, but she said nothing, her needles resuming their rhythm. Names, she knew, were often a mask, but they could also be a key. Ruby Keene, the name rolled in her mind, conjuring images of bright lights and fleeting dreams. She glanced again at Mr. Pye, who had now spilled sugar on the tablecloth and was brushing it away with a trembling hand. The tea-room door jingled, and Inspector Slack strode in, his scowl deeper than usual. He scanned the room, his gaze settling on Miss Marple. Miss Marple, he said, his tone clipped. A word, if you please. The room fell silent, all eyes on the elderly spinster as she set her knitting in her basket and rose with quiet dignity. Of course, Inspector, she said, her voice mild as milk. She followed him to a small table near the window, away from the eager ears of the village gossips. Slack sat heavily, his notebook already open. You were at Gossington Hall this morning. Mrs. Bantry seems to think you've got some insight into this mess. Care to share? Miss Marple tilted her head, her eyes bright behind her spectacles. I'm merely an observer, Inspector, but I did notice a few things. The girl Ruby, you say, wasn't killed in the library. Her shoes were too clean for the gravel drive, and her position was staged, I think. Slack's pen paused. Staged. You're saying someone carried her in and arranged her like a mannequin? Something like that, Miss Marple replied. And there's the matter of the missing earring. A single pearl, real, not paste. Its twin wasn't on the body or in the room. That's curious, don't you think? Slack grunted, jotting a note. Curious, maybe, but I'm more interested in who she was and why she ended up at the Bantrys. We've confirmed she's Ruby Keene, a dance hostess at the Majestic. Worked there for 6 months. No family in the area, but she had a room at the hotel. We're searching it now. Miss Marple nodded, her mind already turning. A dance hostess. That explains the dress, perhaps, but not why she was brought to St. Mary Mead. The Majestic is a world away from our little village. Slack's eyes narrowed. You think someone local's involved? I think, Miss Marple said carefully, that someone wanted her found here. The library wasn't a random choice. It's personal, Inspector. Slack snapped his notebook shut. Personal or not, I'll get to the bottom of it. If you hear anything in this gossip mill, you let me know. As he stood to leave, Miss Marple's gaze drifted back to Mr. Pye, who was now staring into his empty teacup as if it held the secrets of the universe. She made a mental note to speak with him later. Florists, she knew, saw more than they let, and deliveries to hotels, bouquets for secret admirers, whispered confidences over roses. By midday, Miss Marple decided to take a stroll through the village, her basket swinging lightly on her arm. The air was crisp, scented with fallen leaves and the faint smoke of chimneys. She passed the butcher's, where Mr. Hodge was regaling a customer with his theory that Ruby Keene was a runaway heiress. At the post office, Miss Finch, the postmistress, was sorting letters with unusual vigour, her lips pursed as if holding back a juicy tidbit. Miss Marple's destination was the churchyard, where she often found clarity among the weathered gravestones. As she approached, she saw Mrs. Price, the village's most prolific gossip, tending a pot of chrysanthemums by her husband's grave. Mrs. Price was a stout woman with a sharp nose and a sharper tongue, her grey curls peeking from beneath a faded scarf. "Good morning, Mrs. Price," Miss Marple said, pausing by the gate. "A sad business at Gossington Hall, isn't it?" Mrs. Price straightened, her eyes gleaming with the thrill of scandal. "Sad? It's downright shocking, Miss Marple, a girl like that, dead in the Colonel's library. I told my niece, it's the sort of thing you read about in those dreadful novels, not in St. Mary Mead." Miss Marple nodded sympathetically. "Quite. Did you ever see her, this Ruby Keene? Perhaps at the flower show or the market?" Mrs. Price hesitated, her fingers tightening on her trowel. "Well, now you mention it, I might have seen her once. Last month, at the bus stop by the Red Lion. She was waiting, all dolled up in a green dress knot, as fancy as the one they found her in. Mind you, she was talking to someone, a man, but I couldn't see his face. He had his back to me, and it was getting dark." Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her voice remained gentle. "A man, you say? That's interesting. Anyone we might know?" Mrs. Price's cheeks flushed. "Oh, I wouldn't like to say. It was just a glance, You see, could have been anyone, but she looked nervous, I thought, kept glancing over her shoulder. Miss Marple filed this away, her mind conjuring the image of Ruby Keene at a lonely bus stop, her sequined dreams clashing with the village's quiet rhythms. "Thank you, Mrs. Price," she said. "You've been most helpful." As she turned to leave, Mrs. Price called after her, "Miss Marple, do you think it's safe, with a killer about? My niece is all in a tizzy." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "I think, Mrs. Price, that the truth has a way of coming to light. We must simply keep our eyes open." Her next stop was Pye's Florist, a tiny shop fragrant with lilies and lavender. Mr. Pye, a wiry man with a perpetually anxious expression, was arranging a bouquet of dahlias when Miss Marple entered. His hands froze, and a petal fluttered too. The counter. "Good afternoon, Mr. Pye," Miss Marple said, her tone as warm as a summer afternoon. "I was hoping you might help me with something." Mr. Pye's eyes darted to the door, as if expecting Inspector Slack to burst in. "Me, Miss Marple? I don't know anything about what happened." Miss Marple's smile didn't waver. "Oh, I'm sure you don't. But you deliver flowers to the Majestic Hotel, don't you? I thought you might have seen this Ruby Keene, perhaps, when dropping off an order." Mr. Pye swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. Well, yes, I deliver there. Seen her once or twice, maybe. Pretty girl, always smiling. But I didn't know her, not really." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes catching the slight tremor in his hands. "Of course. And did she ever order flowers herself? Or perhaps receive them from someone?" Mr. Pye busied himself with the dahlias, his fingers fumbling. "Not that I recall. She was just around, you know, always with people, laughing. I didn't pay much mind, but Miss Marple did pay mind. She noticed the way his eyes avoided hers, the way his voice caught on laughing. She thanked him and left, her mind turning over the florist's unease. He knew something, she was certain, but pressing him now would only make him clam up tighter. That evening, Miss Marple sat in her cottage, her knitting abandoned as she sipped a cup of chamomile tea. The village whispers had given her much to ponder. Ruby Keene, a dance hostess at the Majestic, had been seen with a mysterious man at a bus stop, nervous and glancing over her shoulder. Mr. Pye, usually so chatty, was hiding something, his nerves betraying him. And then there was the earring, the open window, the sharp scent of perfume Mary had mentioned. These were threads in a tapestry, but the pattern was still unclear. She rose, crossing to her writing desk, where she jotted a few notes in her neat, spidery handwriting. Ruby Keene, 18, dance hostess, Majestic Hotel, strangled elsewhere, placed in library, earring, 1 pearl, missing twin. Real, not costume. Window, open a crack, no forced entry. Perfume, sharp, unusual. Per Mary, Mrs. Price, saw Ruby with a man at bus stop, nervous demeanor. Mr. Pye, anxious, evasive, knows more. She set down her pen, her eyes drifting to the window, where the moon hung low over St. Mary Mead. The village was quiet now, but its whispers were loud in her mind. Ruby Keene's death was no accident, no random act of violence. Someone had chosen Gottington Hall, had chosen that library to send a message, but to whom? The Bantrys, the village, or someone else entirely? Miss Marple's lips curved in a faint smile. "Someone here knows more than they're saying," she murmured, her voice barely audible over the ticking of her mantel clock. The mystery was deepening, and she was only beginning to unravel its threads. Chapter 3. The hotel connection. The majestic hotel stood like a gaudy peacock amid the rolling fields beyond St. Mary Mead, its neon sign winking against the grey autumn sky. By mid-morning, Miss Jane Marple was on her way, seated in the back of the village's only taxi, driven by young Tommy Pierce, who was more accustomed to ferrying farmers' wives to market than amateur sleuths to crime scenes. The taxi rattled along the winding road, and Miss Marple gazed out at the hedgerows, her mind weaving through the threads of the mystery. Ruby Keane's twisted body, the single pearl earring, Mr. Pye's nervous glance, and Mrs. Price's tale of a shadowy man at the bus stop. Ever been to the Majestic, Miss Marple? Tommy asked, glancing at her in the rearview mirror. His freckled face was alight with curiosity, no doubt fueled by the village's rampant gossip. Once or twice, for a charity tea, Miss Marple replied, her voice mild. It's a lively place, isn't it? All those dancers and guests from London. Tommy grinned. Lively's one word for it. My cousin says it's full of fancy types, throwing money around. That Ruby Keane, she was one of their dancers, wasn't she? Pity what happened. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled behind her spectacles. A pity, indeed, Tommy. Did your cousin ever mention her? Ruby, I mean. Tommy shrugged, his hands loose. On the wheel, not much. Said she was always smiling, but kept to herself. Had a way of making folk notice her, though wore bright dresses, like she was on a stage, even off it. Miss Marple nodded, filing this away. Ruby's flair for attention was a clue in itself, one that clashed with the quiet deliberation of her body's placement in the Bantry's library. As the taxi pulled into the hotel's gravel courtyard, she thanked Tommy and stepped out, her black lace-up shoes crunching softly. The Majestic loomed before her, its whitewashed facade festooned with ivy, its windows glinting like curious eyes. Inside, the lobby was a whirl of activity. Bellhops darted about with suitcases, and a pianist tinkled a jazzy tune in the corner. The air smelled of polish, cigarette smoke, and a faint trace of jasmine. Miss Marple approached the reception desk, where a young clerk with slicked back hair was sorting reservation cards. Good morning, she said, her smile disarming. I'm here about Ruby Keane. I understand she worked here as a dance hostess. The clerk's face tightened, his fingers pausing. You're with the police? He asked, his voice low. Oh no, Miss Marple said, her tone as gentle as a summer breeze. I'm a friend of Mrs. Bantry's, from St. Mary Mead. I'm simply trying to understand what happened to that poor girl. The clerk relaxed slightly, though his eyes remained wary. Mr. Prescott's, the manager. He knew Ruby best. I'll fetch him. Moments later, Mr. Prescott appeared, a portly man in a pinstripe suit, his moustache quivering with self-importance. Miss Marple, is it? He said, ushering her to a plush armchair near a potted palm. A dreadful business, this. Ruby was one of our brightest stars. The guests loved her. Miss Marple settled into the chair, her knitting basket on her lap. She sounds charming. Can you tell me about her? What sort of girl was she? Prescott adjusted his tie, his gaze drifting to the chandelier above. Ambitious, I'd say. Came to us 6 months ago, fresh from some little town up north. She had a knack for dancing waltz, foxtrot, you name it. But she was private. Didn't mingle much with the other girls. Always rushing off after her shifts, like she had somewhere to be. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, a rhythm that seemed to soothe Prescott's nerves. Somewhere to be, she repeated. Did she ever mention a particular friend? Or perhaps a gentleman caller. Prestcourt's moustache twitched. Well, there was talk of a patron. Someone important, or so she hinted. She never named him, but she'd come back from her nights off with gifts, fancy scarves, that sort of thing. I assumed it was one of our wealthier guests. Miss Marple's eyes sharpened, though her smile remained placid. And the night. She died. Was she working? Prestcott hesitated, his fingers drumming on his knee. She was meant to, but she left early. Said she wasn't feeling well. I saw her slip out the side door around 9. That was the last I saw of her. Miss Marple nodded, her mind turning over the timeline. Ruby left the hotel at 9, yet her body was found in Gossington Hall's library by 7 the next morning. Miles away, did anyone see her leave with someone? She asked. Prestcott shook his head. Not that I know. But you might ask Elsie, one of our chambermaids. She and Ruby were friendly. Elsie was found in the hotel's laundry room, a cavernous space filled with the hum of washing machines and the scent of starch. She was a wiry girl of about 20, with dark hair pinned untidily under a cap. Her hands were red from scrubbing, and her eyes widened when Miss Marple introduced herself. I don't know much, miss, Elsie said, glancing nervously at the door. Ruby was nice, but she kept her secrets. Always said she was going to make it big, leave this place behind. Miss Marple's voice was gentle, coaxing. I'm sure she did. Did she ever talk about where she went on her nights off, or who she met? Elsie bit her lip, her fingers twisting a damp cloth. Once she mentioned a place in Dannymouth, a club, I think, where the music was loud and the drinks were pricey. She said she met someone there, someone who could open doors, but she clammed up when I asked more. Miss Marple's heart quickened. Dannymouth, a coastal town nearby, was known for its nightlife, a stark contrast to St. Mary Mead's. Quiet lanes, and the night she died. She prompted, Did you see her? Elsie's eyes darted to the floor. I saw her in the corridor, near the staff exit. She was arguing with someone, a man, I think, but it was dark, and I only caught a glimpse. He was tall, wore a long coat. Ruby looked upset, kept saying, You promised me. Then they were gone. Miss Marple's needles paused, her mind racing. You've been very helpful, Elsie. One last thing, did Ruby have any photographs? Perhaps in her room, Elsie nodded. She had a few, pinned to her mirror. One was her with an older man, smiling at some fancy event. But when I tidied her room yesterday, it was gone. Miss Marple thanked Elsie and made her way to Ruby's room, which the police had already searched. The small space was tidy, with a narrow bed, a chipped dresser, and a mirror adorned with faded ribbons. The police had left the room in disarray. But Miss Marple's sharp eyes caught something they'd missed, a torn ticket stub, half hidden under a table leg. She knelt, her joints protesting, and retrieved it. The stub was for a train to Dannymouth, dated the previous evening. Stamped at 8:45 p.m., a clue to where she was last night. Miss Marple murmured, slipping the stub into her pocket. She straightened, her gaze lingering on the empty spot on the mirror where Elsie said a photograph had been. A missing photograph, a shadowy argument. A ticket to Dannymouth. The threads were multiplying, each one pulling her deeper into the mystery. Back in the lobby, Miss Marple paused by a display case of hotel memorabilia. Old photographs showed dance halls and smiling guests, a glimpse into the Majestic's livelier days. One image caught her eye, a group shot from a recent gala, with Ruby in the background, her emerald dress sparkling. Beside her stood a man, his face partially obscured by a champagne glass, but his posture was stiff, almost guarded. Miss Marple made a mental note to inquire about the gala's guest list as she stepped outside. The wind carried a faint tank of the sea, reminding her of Danemoth's proximity. Ruby had been on her way there, perhaps to meet the man Elsie saw, the man who promised something. But why end up in St. Mary Mead, in the Bantry's library? The question nagged at her, as persistent as a loose stitch in her knitting. She hailed Tommy's taxi for the return to St. Mary Mead, her mind buzzing with possibilities. Ruby Keene had been ambitious, secretive, and connected to someone powerful, dangerous. The missing photograph, the ticket stub, and the argument in the corridor were pieces of a puzzle, but the picture was far from clear. As the taxi rumbled back toward the village, Miss Marple's lips curved in a faint smile. The majestic hotel had given her a glimpse into Ruby's world, but it was the shadows cast by that world that held the truth. Chapter 4. The Bantry's secret. The afternoon sun filtered through the lace curtains of Gossington Hall, casting delicate patterns on the polished floor of the drawing-room. Miss Jane Marple sat in a high-backed chair, her knitting basket at her side, her needles idle for once. Across from her, Dolly Bantry paced, her hands clasped tightly behind her back. The air was thick with unease, the memory of Ruby Keene's twisted body in the library lingering like an unwelcome guest. Colonel Arthur Bantry stood by the fireplace, his pipe unlit, his face etched with a discomfort that Miss Marple noted with quiet interest. "Jane, I don't know how you stay so calm," Dolly said, pausing to adjust a vase of chrysanthemums that didn't need adjusting. "The police have been traipsing through the house all morning, and the village won't stop talking. Mrs. Hartnell cornered me at the butcher's, practically accusing us of harbouring murderers." Miss Marple's lips curved faintly. "Gossip is like a river, Dolly. It flows whether you mind it or not. But it often carries truth in its current, if you know where to look." Arthur cleared his throat, his fingers fidgeting with his pipe. "Truth or not, this business is a dashed nuisance. Inspector Slack keeps eyeing me like I'm the prime suspect. Me, in my own house." Miss Marple's eyes, sharp behind her spectacles, studied him. "Inspector Slack is thorough, Arthur, but he does tend to bark up the wrong tree. Tell me, have either of you remembered anything more about Ruby Keene? Perhaps a connection, however slight?" Dolly stopped pacing, her brow furrowing. "I've racked my brains, Jane. I never saw the girl before. That dress, that makeup, she not the sort who'd blend into St. Mary Mead." Arthur shifted, his gaze fixed on the hearth. "Well, I suppose I might have seen her once, at that charity gala at the Majestic, a few months back. She was dancing, all smiles and sequins. I didn't speak to her, mind you, just noticed her." Dolly's head snapped up, her eyes narrowing. "Arthur Bantry, you never mentioned that. You mean to say you saw this girl and didn't think it worth telling me?" "It wasn't worth telling," Arthur protested, his moustache bristling. "She was just part of the scenery, Dolly. I was there for the raffle, not the dance floor." Miss Marple's needles resumed their soft clicking, a counterpoint to the rising tension. "A charity gala," she mused. "That's interesting. Ruby was a dance hostess, after all. Did she approach you, Arthur, or was it merely a passing glance?" Arthur's cheeks reddened. "A glance, that's all. I swear it, Jane, I'm not in the habit of chatting up young girls." Dolly snorted, but her tone was more teasing than accusatory. "You'd better not be, Arthur, or you'll be sleeping in the guest room for a month." Miss Marple's smile was gentle, but her mind was racing. Arthur's admission, however innocent, placed him at the Majestic during an event where Ruby Keene had been prominent. The missing photograph Elsie mentioned of Ruby with an older man at a fancy event flickered in her thoughts. Could Arthur have been in that picture? Or was there another man, one who loomed larger in Ruby's life-hand? Death. Let's not jump to conclusions, Miss Marple said. But it's curious, Arthur, that you saw her. The gala might be a thread worth pulling. Dolly, do you still have the program from that event? Dolly frowned, then nodded. Somewhere. In the study, I think. I'll dig it out later. But honestly, Jane, do you think this has something to do with us? Why our library, of all places? Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. That's the heart of it, Dolly. Someone chose your home deliberately. It's a message, or perhaps a misdirection. We need to know why. The conversation was interrupted by a sharp rap at the door. Mary, the maid, entered, her auburn curls still tucked nervously behind her ears. "Beg pardon, ma'am," she said to Dolly, "but Inspector Slack's back, and he's asking to see the library again. Says they missed something." Dolly sighed. "Very well, Mary. Show him in, but tell him to mind the furniture. He's got no sense of decorum." As Mary hurried off, Miss Marple rose, her basket in hand. "I'd like to join them, if I may. Sometimes a fresh pair of eyes sees what others miss." The library was much as it had been that morning, though the body had been removed, leaving only a faint chalk outline on the rug. Inspector Slack stood by the fireplace, his scowl deepening as he scribbled in his notebook. A young constable was poking at the bookshelves, looking more confused than purposeful. "Miss Marple," Slack said, his tone grudging. "Mrs. Bantry says you've been poking about. Find anything useful?" "Only questions, Inspector," Miss Marple replied, her voice mild. "But I wonder if you've checked the desk. People often hide things in plain sight." Slack's eyes narrowed, but he gestured to the constable. "Check it, Jenkins." The constable, a gangly youth with a nervous tic, opened the desk drawers, revealing nothing but pens, a dusty ledger, and a pack of playing cards. Miss Marple, however, knelt by the desk's lower shelf, her fingers brushing the wood. She paused, her eyes catching a faint glint beneath a stack of old magazines. With careful precision, she extracted a folded letter, its edges yellowed but intact. The envelope was addressed to Dear Colonel in a looping, feminine hand. "Well, I'll be," Slack muttered, snatching the letter. He opened it, his eyes scanning the contents. "It's from Ruby Keene, dated 2 months ago. Listen to this. Dear Colonel Bantry, I hope you'll forgive my boldness, but I saw you at the gala, and I thought you might help me. I'm in a bit of trouble, and a gentleman like you could make all the difference. It's unsigned, but it's her handwriting, according to the hotel's records." Arthur, who had followed them in, went pale. "I never got that letter. I swear, Jane, I never saw it before now." Dolly's hands went to her hips. "Arthur, if you've been getting letters from dance hostesses, I'll have your head." Miss Marple raised a hand, her voice calm but firm. "Let's not leap to conclusions. The letter was hidden, not delivered, and the handwriting." She peered at it over Slack's shoulder, her eyes narrowing. "It's neat, but there's a tremor in the loops, as if written under duress. This letter changes everything, but it's not what it seems." Slack snorted. "Not what it seems. It looks like a motive to me. Colonel, you'd better explain yourself." Arthur spluttered, but Miss Marple interjected. "Inspector, if Arthur were involved, would he leave such a letter in his own desk?" "No, this was placed here, just like Ruby's body. Someone wants us to suspect the colonel. Slack's scowl deepened, but he tucked the letter into an evidence bag. We'll see about that. Jenkins searched the rest of the room. Miss Marple, if you've got any more bright ideas, I'm all ears. As the constable resumed his search, Miss Marple stepped back, her mind worry. The letter was a deliberate plant, meant to cast suspicion on Arthur. But why? To frame him, or to distract from the real killer? And who had access to the library to hide it there? She thought of the open window Mary had mentioned, the sharp scent of perfume, and the ticket stub to Dannymoth. The pieces were accumulating, but they refused to align. That evening, Miss Marple sat with Dolly in the drawing room, a tray of tea between them. Arthur had retired early, claiming a headache, though Dolly suspected it was embarrassment. The fire crackled, casting shadows that danced across the walls. Jane, do you really think someone's trying to frame Arthur? Dolly asked, her voice low. It's absurd, but that letter, it's unsettling. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her eyes distant. It's more than unsettling, Dolly, it's calculated. Ruby Keene wrote that letter, or someone wrote it for her. The question is, why it was hidden here, and why now? Dolly leaned forward, her eyes searching. You think it's connected to the gala, don't you? That's why you asked about the program. Miss Marple nodded. The gala places Arthur in Ruby's orbit, however briefly, but it also places others, their guests, staff, perhaps the man Elsie saw Ruby arguing with. We need that program, Dolly. It might tell us who else was watching Ruby that night. Dolly rose, her jaw set. I'll find it now. If someone's trying to drag Arthur into this, I'll have their hide. As Dolly rummaged through the study, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the letter. Its words were vague, almost theatrical, as if meant to be found. She recalled Elsie's mention of the missing photograph, the man in the long coat, the ticket stub to Dannymoth. Ruby Keene had been reaching for something ambition, perhaps, or escape, but someone had stopped her, and now they were weaving a web to ensnare the band TRYS. Dolly returned, triumphantly waving a crumpled program. Here it is, the majestic Spring Gala, April 12th. Guest list, performers, the lot. Miss Marple took the program, her fingers tracing the names. Ruby Keene was listed as a dance hostess, alongside a dozen others, but it was the guest list that caught her eye. Local dignitaries, a few London businessmen, and one name that made her pause, Mr. Conway Jefferson, a wealthy widower known for his philanthropy. She'd heard whispers of his fondness for young performers. Could he be the patron Mr. Prescott mentioned? This will be most helpful, Miss Marple said, folding the program into her basket. But we must tread carefully, Dolly. Someone is playing a dangerous game, and we're only beginning to see the board. Chapter 5. The second victim. The late afternoon sky over St. Mary Mead hung heavy with clouds, as if the village itself sensed the growing darkness of the mystery unfolding within its borders. Miss Jane Marple sat in her cottage, her knitting. Needles paused as she studied the gala program from the majestic hotel, its pages now creased from her careful scrutiny. The name Conway Jefferson lingered in her mind, a wealthy widower, known for his generosity to young artists and a potential link to Ruby Keene's ambitions. The letter found in the Bantry's library, addressed to Dear Colonel, gnawed at her thoughts, its theatrical tone suggesting a deliberate attempt to mislead. But before she could follow this thread further, a sharp knock at her door broke her reverie. It was Tommy Pierce, the taxi driver, his freckled face pale and his cap askew. Miss Marple, "You'd best come quick," he said, breathless. "Been another one a body, I mean, out at the quarry. The police are there, and Mrs. Bantry sent me to fetch you." Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her voice remained steady. "Another body? Who is it, Tommy?" "Don't know yet," he said, wiping his brow. "But it's bad. They found her in a car, all burnt up. Constable Reed's saying it's tied to the Keene girl." Miss Marple set her knitting aside, her mind racing. 2 deaths in as many days, in a village as quiet as St. Mary Mead, was no coincidence. She gathered her shawl and basket, her black lace-up shoes clicking purposefully as she followed Tommy to his taxi. The drive to the quarry, a jagged scar of limestone on the village's outskirts, was silent save for the rumble of the engine. Miss Marple's thoughts churned. Ruby Keene, strangled and placed in the Bantry's library. A missing earring, a ticket stub to Dannymoth, a hidden letter, and now another victim. The pattern was elusive, but she felt its edges forming. The quarry was a hive of activity when they arrived. Police cars lined the dirt track, their lights flashing against the grey stone. A crowd of villagers, farmers, shopkeepers, and curious children hovered at a safe distance, their whispers a low hum. Inspector Slack stood by a charred wreck of a car, its metal twisted and blackened, the air thick with the acrid stench of burnt rubber. Miss Marple approached, her slight figure almost lost among the towering policemen. But her presence drew Slack's reluctant nod. "Miss Marple," he said, his scowl softened by exhaustion. "You've got a knack for turning up where there's trouble. This one's grim. Female, young, found in a stolen car, burnt beyond recognition, but we're working on identification." Miss Marple peered at the wreckage, her eyes narrowing. The car, a Morris Minor, was a skeleton of its former self, the seats reduced to ash, the windows shattered. "Stolen, you say?" she asked, her voice mild but probing. "From where? Reported missing from Dannymoth yesterday," Slack replied, flipping through his notebook. "Belongs to a local doctor. No sign of him, though, we're thinking. The killer used it to dump the body, then set it alight to cover their tracks." Miss Marple's gaze drifted to the ground, where a constable was marking off tire tracks in the dust. And the victim, any clues to her identity? Slack gestured to a small evidence bag in his hand. "Found this near the car. A badge, looks like one of those Girl Guide pins. We're checking with the local troop. Could be one of theirs." Miss Marple's heart sank. The Girl Guides, a wholesome group of young girls who camped and baked and learned knots, were a far cry from Ruby Keene's world of sequins and dance halls. Yet the proximity of the crime's Gossington Hall, and now the quarry, suggested a connection. She stepped closer to the car, her eyes catching a glint of metal in the ash. "Inspector, might I see that badge?" Slack handed it over, his expression skeptical. The badge was small, a trefoil design with a singed ribbon, the kind worn proudly on a guide's uniform. Miss Marple turned it over, noting a faint inscription, P. Harper. Her mind flashed to Pamela Harper, a shy girl of 16 who helped at the church bazaar, always in her neat guide uniform with sensible brown shoes. Could this be her? "This is troubling," Miss Marple murmured, returning the badge. "Pamela Harper is a local girl, a guide. Her shoes. Inspector, did you find any near the car?" Slack frowned. "No shoes, just the badge." "Why?" Miss Marple's lips pursed. Ruby Keene's shoes were clean, too clean for the gravel at Gossington Hall. If this is Pamela, her shoes sensible, sturdy ones, might tell a similar story. She didn't walk here any more than Ruby did. Slack's eyes narrowed, but he jotted a note. You're seeing patterns where I see chaos, Miss Marple, but I'll have the team look for shoes. If this is a serial killer, we've got a bigger problem than I thought. Miss Marple shook her head, her voice soft but firm. Not a serial killer, Inspector. These deaths are deliberate, but the motives may differ. Ruby's death was staged, personal. This feels like a cover-up, or perhaps a mistake. Slack grunted, unconvinced, and turned to bark orders at his men. Miss Marple stepped back, her gaze sweeping the quarry. The crowd had grown, and she spotted Mrs. Price, the village gossip, clutching her scarf and whispering to a neighbor. Nearby, a young girl in a guide uniform stood alone, her face pale. Miss Marple recognized her as Lily Carter, Pamela's friend from the troop. She approached Lily, her smile gentle. Lily, dear, I'm so sorry about all this. Were you and Pamela close? Lily's eyes brimmed with tears, her hands twisting the hem of her sash. She was my best friend, Miss Marple. We were at camp yesterday, near the woods. She said she was going to fetch water, but she never came back. I saw a man, though lurking by the trees. He was watching us. Miss Marple's heart quickened. A man. Can you describe him? Lily bit her lip, her voice trembling. Tall, with a hat pulled low. He had a funny walk, like he was limping. I told Mrs. Evans, our leader, but she said I was imagining things. Miss Marple patted her hand. You weren't imagining, Lily. You've been very brave. Did Pamela mention anything unusual before she left? Lily hesitated, then whispered, she found something in the woods, a shiny thing, like jewelry. She wouldn't show me, but she said it was important. She was going to tell someone, but then she was gone. Miss Marple's mind raced. A shiny object, possibly jewelry, found in the woods near the quarry. Could it be Ruby's missing pearl, earring, or something else entirely? She thanked Lily and made a mental note to visit the campsite. The connection between Pamela and Ruby was tenuous, but the quarry's proximity to Gossington Hall suggested a single hand at work, or perhaps two. Working in tandem. Back at Gossington Hall, Miss Marple found Dolly Bantry in the garden, pruning roses with a vigour that betrayed her agitation. The news of the second body had reached her, and her face was pale beneath her gardening hat. Jane, is it true? Dolly asked, her shears pausing. Another girl in the quarry. This is turning into a nightmare. Miss Marple nodded, settling onto a bench. I'm afraid so. Likely Pamela Harper, a girl guide. The police are confirming it, but the circumstances are troubling. Dolly dropped her shears, her hands trembling. Two girls, Jane, and one in our library. Are we cursed, or is someone targeting us? Not cursed, Miss Marple said, her voice calm, but targeted, perhaps. The letter we found, addressed to Arthur, it was meant to point fingers. This second death, so soon after, feels like an attempt to muddy the waters. Pamela's death is different, hasty, brutal, not staged like Ruby's. Dolly's eyes widened. You think they're connected, but not the same. Miss Marple's needles resumed their clicking, a soothing counterpoint to the grim conversation. I think Pamela saw something, or found something, that made her dangerous. Lily, her friend, mentioned a shiny object in the woods. It could be a clue, or it could be a trap. Dolly sank onto the bench, her face grim. What do we do, Jane? The village is in a panic, and Arthur's pacing like a caged lion. That letter's got him rattled. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. We follow. The clues, Dolly, the gala program, the letter, the ticket stub to Dannymoth, and now this badge and Lily's story. They're pieces of a puzzle, but the picture is still hidden. I'd like to visit the Girl Guides camp tomorrow. Something tells me Pamela's discovery holds the key. Dolly nodded, her jaw set. I'll come with you. If someone's using our home as a stage for murder, I want to know who. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the garden, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the two victims, Ruby with her sequined dreams and secret patrons, and Pamela with her sensible shoes and unexpected find. The quarry and the library were miles apart in purpose, yet bound by a thread she couldn't yet see. She murmured, almost to herself, 2 deaths, but one motive, or perhaps 2. Chapter 6. The wealthy widower. The morning mist clung to the fields as Miss Jane Marple made her way back to the majestic hotel, her black lace-up shoes tapping a steady rhythm on the gravel path. The discovery of Pamela Harper's charred remains in the quarry had cast a shadow over St. Mary Mead, and the village's whispers had grown into a chorus of fear. Miss Marple's mind was a whirl of clues. Ruby Keene's staged body, the missing pearl earring, the Dannymoth ticket stub, the forged letter in the Bantry's library, and now Pamela's Girl Guide badge and Lily's tale of a limping man in the woods. The gala program, tucked safely in her basket, had pointed her to Conway Jefferson, a name that carried weight in both wealth and mystery. Today, she intended to meet him. The Majestic's lobby was quieter than before. The jazz piano silent, the air heavy with the scent of wax and wilting roses. Miss Marple approached the reception desk, where the same slick-haired clerk greeted her with a wary nod. Back again, Miss Marple. Mr. Prescott's in his office, but I can fetch someone else if you like. I'd like to speak with Mr. Conway Jefferson, Miss Marple said, her voice as gentle as a summer breeze. I understand he's a guest here, and I believe he knew Ruby Keene. The clerk's eyes flickered, but he nodded. He's in the conservatory, ma'am. I'll let him know you're coming. The conservatory was a glass-domed haven, filled with potted ferns and wicker chairs. Conway Jefferson sat in a wheelchair by a window, his silver hair catching the light, his face lined but handsome, with the air of a man who'd once commanded rooms. Beside him stood a younger man, lean and restless, his dark eyes darting toward the door. A woman, elegant in a dove-grey dress, poured tea at a nearby table, her movements precise but strained. Double quotes, Mr. Jefferson, Miss Marple said, approaching with a polite smile. I'm Jane Marple, from St. Mary Mead. I'm terribly sorry to intrude, but I'm looking into the tragic death of Ruby Keene. Jefferson's eyes, sharp despite his frailty, met hers. Miss Marple, he said, his voice warm but tinged with sorrow. I've heard of you, Dolly Bantry's friend. Yes. Please, sit. This is my son-in-law, Mark Gaskell, and my daughter-in-law, Adelaide Jefferson. Mark gave a curt nod, his fingers tapping his thigh, while Adelaide offered a tight smile, her teacup clinking against its saucer. Miss Marple settled into a chair, her knitting basket at her side, her eyes taking in every detail. Mark's restless energy, Adelaide's forced calm, Jefferson's quiet grief. I was fond of Ruby, Jefferson began, his hands folding in his lap. She was a bright girl, full of dreams. I met her here at the hotel during one of their dances. She reminded me of my late daughter, same spark, same hunger for life. I planned to help her, perhaps even adopt her legally. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly. a soothing counterpoint to the tension in the room. "Adopt her?" she asked, her tone mild. "That's a generous gesture, Mr. Jefferson." Mark snorted, then caught himself, his face smoothing into a mask of indifference. Generous, sure, but Ruby was no saint. She knew how to charm, especially older men with money. "Mark." Adelaide's voice was sharp, her eyes flashing. "That's unkind." Ruby was ambitious, yes, but she was kind to Conway. Jefferson's jaw tightened, but he waved a hand. "Mark's blunt, but he's not wrong." Ruby had her sights set high. "I didn't mind. I wanted to give her a chance, a real future." Miss Marple's eyes drifted to Mark, noting the way his fingers twitched, as if itching to escape. "And you, Mr. Gaskell, did you know Ruby well?" Mark shrugged, his smile thin. "Well enough. She was always around, dancing, laughing, drawing. Attention. Not my type. But she had Conway wrapped around her finger." Adelaide set her teacup down with a clink. "Mark, please. This isn't the time." Miss Marple's gaze shifted to Adelaide, whose composure was fraying at the edges. "Mrs. Jefferson, you spent time with Ruby too, I presume. Did she ever confide in you?" Adelaide hesitated, her fingers smoothing her skirt. "Not really. She was polite, but distant. I saw her as Conway's project, not mine. She had a way of making you feel she was hiding something." Miss Marple nodded, her mind turning over their words. Jefferson's affection for Ruby was genuine, but it had clearly stirred tension in his family. Mark's disdain and Adelaide's unease suggested more than simple disapproval. She thought of the missing photograph from Ruby's room, the man in the long coat Elsie saw, and the letter implicating Arthur Bantry. Was Jefferson the patron Ruby had hinted at, or was there another? "Mr. Jefferson," she said, "did Ruby ever mention being in trouble? Perhaps a disagreement, or someone who worried her?" Jefferson's eyes clouded. "She was anxious the last time we spoke, a few days ago. Said she'd made a mistake, trusted the wrong person. I pressed her, but she wouldn't say more. I thought it was just nerves, young girls. You know, they get ideas." Miss Marple's needles paused, her heart quickening. "A mistake," she repeated. "That's significant. Did she receive gifts from anyone besides you? Jewelry, perhaps?" Jefferson frowned. "Jewelry, not that I know. I gave her a scarf, a trinket or two, but nothing extravagant. Why, Miss?" Marple smiled faintly. "Just a thought. A pearl earring was found with her, but its twin is missing. It's a small thing, but small things often matter." As she spoke, her eyes caught a movement at Adelaide's hand, reaching for her teacup, froze, then quickly resumed. Miss Marple filed this away, along with Mark's sudden stillness. Something about the earring had struck a nerve. The conversation was interrupted by a maid, who entered with a tray of sandwiches. As she set it down, a handkerchief slipped from her tray, fluttering to the floor. Miss Marple bent to retrieve it, noting the embroidered initial. It was finely made, silk, not the sort a maid would carry. She handed it back, her eyes meeting. The maid's fleetingly nervous glance. "Thank you, miss," the maid mumbled. Hurrying out, Miss Marple's mind raced. An R for Ruby, or someone else. The handkerchief was out of place, like the letter in the Bantry's library, and it suggested someone in the hotel was more involved than they let on. She rose, smoothing her shawl. "Thank you, Mr. Jefferson. Mr. Gaskell, Mrs. Jefferson, you've been most helpful." As she turned to leave, Mark called after her. "Miss Marple, You don't really think Ruby's death has anything to do with us, do you? Miss Marple paused, her smile enigmatic. I think, Mr. Gaskell, that money often twists the heart more than any body. Back in St. Mary Mead, Miss Marple visited the Girl Guides campsite, accompanied by Dolly Bantry, who insisted on coming despite her unease. The camp was a clearing in the woods near the quarry, marked by canvas tents and a fire pit still, smouldering from the previous day. Mrs. Evans, the troop leader, greeted them, her face drawn with worry over Pamela Harper's death. Miss Marple, Mrs. Bantry, she said, wringing her hands. It's awful, just awful. Pamela was such a good girl. I can't imagine who'd do this. Miss Marple's eyes scanned the clearing, noting the trampled grass and a faint path leading toward the quarry. Lily mentioned Pamela found something. In the woods, she said, a shiny object, possibly jewelry. Did she show it to you? Mrs. Evans shook her head. No, but she was excited that afternoon. Said she'd found something special. I thought it was just a trinket. You know how girls are. I told her to put it in her pocket and focus on her knots. Miss Marple nodded, her gaze drifting to the path. May I look around, Mrs. Evans? With Dolly in tow, she followed the path, her sharp eyes catching a glint in the underbrush. She knelt, retrieving a small metal clasp, the kind used on a necklace or bracelet, its edge slightly bent. It wasn't a pearl earring, but it was jewelry, and its presence so near the quarry was no coincidence. She slipped it into her pocket, her mind connecting it to Lily's story and the handkerchief at the hotel. Dolly, she said, this clasp is important. It's not Ruby's earring, but it might be what Pamela found. If so, it links the woods to the quarry and, perhaps, to the Majestic. Dolly's eyes widened. You think Pamela stumbled onto something about Ruby's killer? I think, Miss Marple said, that Pamela's death was no accident. She saw something, or found something, that made her a threat, and someone at the Majestic knows more than they're telling. As they returned to the camp, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to Conway Jefferson's family, Mark's restlessness, Adelaide's strained composure, the handkerchief with an arthe with threads in a tapestry, but the pattern was still elusive. The wealthy widower's affection for Ruby had stirred resentment, and resentment, she knew, could twist into something darker. The chapter closed with Miss Marple standing at the edge of the clearing, the clasp heavy in her pocket. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the faint echo of Pamela's laughter and Ruby's dreams. 2 girls, 2 deaths, and a web of secrets stretching from the Majestic to St. Mary Mead. Miss Marple's lips curved in a faint smile. Money often twists the heart more than any body, she murmured, her voice lost in the rustling leaves. Chapter 7. The Artist's Alabitha. Late morning sun cast long shadows across St. Mary Mead, gilding the thatched roofs and softening the grim whispers that had gripped the village since Pamela Harper's body was found in the quarry. Miss Jane Marple sat in her garden, her knitting needles idle as she sipped tea and reviewed her notes. Ruby Keene's staged death, the missing pearl earring, the Danamoth ticket stub, the forged letter in the Bantry's library, Pamela's Girl Guide, badge, and the metal clasp from the woods. Conway Jefferson's affection for Ruby, and the unease of his son-in-law, Mark Gaskell, and daughter-in-law Adelaide, lingered in her mind, as did the silk handkerchief with the initial R, but a new name had surfaced in the village's gossip basil. Blake, the flamboyant artist who lived at the edge of St. Mary Mead, known for his wild parties and questionable acquaintances. Mrs. Price had mentioned seeing his car near the quarry. and Miss Marple decided it was time to pay him a visit. Basil's cottage, a ramshackle affair with paint-splattered shutters, stood apart from the village's tidy homes, its garden overgrown with thistles and wild roses. As Miss Marple approached, her black lace-up shoes crunching on the uneven path, she heard the faint strains of jazz drifting from an open window. The door was ajar, and a whiff of turpentine stung her nose as she knocked. The door swung open, revealing Basil Blake himself, a lanky man in his 30s with dishevelled blonde hair and a paint-streaked smock. His blue eyes, bright but guarded, widened at the sight of her. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice a mix of surprise and wariness. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "Good morning, Mr. Blake," Miss Marple said, her smile as disarming as a spring breeze. "I was passing by and thought to inquire about your art. I hear you're quite talented. May I come in?" Basil hesitated, then stepped aside, his grin a touch too wide. "Sure, why not? Mind the mess, though inspiration's a chaotic mistress." The cottage's interior was a riot of colour canvases stacked against walls, easels draped with cloths, and a table littered with brushes and half-empty wine bottles. The air was thick with turpentine and something sharper, almost chemical, that made Miss Marple's nose twitch. She settled onto a sagging sofa, her knitting basket on her lap, her eyes taking in every detail: a cracked mirror reflecting a cluttered corner, a stack of sketchbooks, and a faint smudge of green paint on the floor, the same shade as Ruby Keane's dress. "You've heard about the dreadful events, I presume," Miss Marple began, her tone mild. "Ruby Keane's death, and now poor Pamela Harper. The village is quite shaken." Basil leaned against an easel, his fingers fidgeting with a paintbrush. "Yeah, I heard. Awful business. I didn't know either of them, though. I keep to myself, mostly." Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, a rhythm that seemed to unsettle him, of course. "But you do visit the majestic hotel, don't you? For their dancers, perhaps?" Ruby was a hostess there. Basil's grin faltered. "I've been to a dance or two. Who hasn't? But I don't make a habit of it. Too many stuffed shirts for my taste." "And the night Ruby died?" Miss Marple asked, her eyes gentle but probing. "Mrs. Price mentioned seeing your car near the quarry. Were you painting landscapes, perhaps?" Basil's hand froze, the paintbrush snapping in his grip. "Mrs. Price and her nosy eyes," he muttered. "I was here, Miss Marple, painting all night. Alone. Ask anyone well. No one, I suppose, since I was alone." He laughed, but it was brittle, like glass about to shatter. Miss Marple nodded, her gaze drifting to a canvas in the corner, half covered by a cloth. "May I see your work? I'm quite fond of art, though I'm no expert." Basil hesitated, then shrugged, pulling the cloth aside. The canvas depicted a stormy seascape, all jagged waves and brooding clouds. But Miss Marple's eyes were drawn to a smaller sketch tucked behind it, a pencil drawing of a young woman, her face unmistakably Ruby Keane's, her expression wistful. The style was delicate, almost tender, unlike Basil's usual bold strokes. "That's lovely," Miss Marple said, her voice soft. "Ruby, isn't it? You captured her quite well." Basil's face flushed, and he yanked the cloth back over. "The sketch, just a doodle. Saw her at the hotel once, thought she'd make a good subject. Doesn't mean anything." Miss Marple's smile was serene, but her mind raced. The sketch was no casual doodle. It was intimate, drawn with care. Basil's denial only deepened her suspicion. "Of course," she said, "but it's curious, don't you think? Ruby's face, here in your studio, when you claim you barely knew her. Basil's eyes darted to the door, his voice sharp. Look, I don't know what you're getting at, but I had nothing to do with her death. Or that other girl's. I was here, painting, like I said. Miss Marple rose, smoothing her shawl. I'm sure you were, Mr. Blake. Thank you for your time. I'll let you get back to your work. As she stepped outside, the sharp scent of turpentine followed her, mingling with that chemical tang she couldn't place. It was stronger than it should be, as if Basil had been cleaning more than brushes. She glanced back at the cottage, noting a window left open, its curtain fluttering. A man with an alibi so firm, yet so unprovable, was a man worth watching. Back in St. Mary Mead, Miss Marple stopped by the post office to collect her letters, hoping to catch Miss Finch, the postmistress, who was as reliable a source of gossip as Mrs. Price. The post office was quiet, save for the rustle of envelopes and the hum of a kettle in the back. Miss Finch, a wiry woman with spectacles perched on her nose, greeted her with a knowing look. Miss Marple, I heard you were at Basil Blake's this morning, Miss Finch said, sorting letters with practiced speed. That young man's trouble. If you ask me, always throwing parties, loud music, strange folk coming and going. Miss Marple's lips twitched. He does seem unconventional. Did he ever receive letters from the Majestic Hotel? Or perhaps from Ruby Keene? Miss Finch's hands paused, her eyes gleaming. Now that you mention it, I did see a letter. From the hotel a few weeks back, addressed to him, fancy envelope, scented with something flowery. I thought it odd, since he's not the sort to get formal post. Miss Marple's heart quickened. A scented letter, perhaps like the perfume Mary had noticed in the library. And did you see Ruby herself in the village, Miss Finch? Perhaps near Basil's cottage? Miss Finch leaned forward, her voice dropping. Once, maybe a month ago. She was walking past the church, all done up in a red dress, heading toward the edge of the village. I thought she was visiting someone, but I didn't see who. Miss Marple thanked her and stepped into the crisp afternoon, her mind turning over the new clues. Basil's sketch of Ruby, the scented letter, the chemical smell in his studio. They painted a picture of a man more entangled with Ruby than he admitted. But was he a killer or a pawn in someone else's game? That evening, Miss Marple joined Dolly Bantry for tea at Gossington Hall, the library now sealed off by police tape. Dolly was restless, her fingers twisting a napkin as she recounted the villagers' latest theories, most of which pinned Basil as the culprit. They're saying he's got a dark side, Jane, Dolly said, pouring tea with a shaky hand. Mrs. Hartnell swears he's mixed up with some London crowd, the sort who'd know a girl like Ruby. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her eyes distant. Basil is certainly interesting, but I'm not convinced he's our killer. His alibi is weak, but that sketch, it's too personal for a casual acquaintance. And the smell in his studio turpentine, yes, but something else, like cleaning fluid. It suggests he's hiding something. Dolly's eyes widened. You think he's covering up evidence? Possibly, Miss Marple said, or someone else is, and he's caught in the middle. The letter in your library, the handkerchief at the Majestic, the clasp in the woods there, all signs of manipulation. Someone is weaving a web. Dolly and Basil may be a thread, not the spider. Dolly set her cup down with a clink. Then what's next? The police are hounding Arthur, and now this second girl, Pamelit's too much. Miss Marple's needles resumed their clicking. We need to know more about Ruby's movements. The ticket stub to Dannymoth, the gala, the man in the long coat Elsie saw. And Pamela's find in the woods, Lily called it a shiny object. I suspect it's connected to Ruby, perhaps even that missing earring. As the fire crackled, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to Basil's sketch, its tender lines at odds with his cavalier demeanour. He knew Ruby, perhaps better than he let on, but the chemical smell and the open window suggested a recent effort to erase evidence. Was he protecting himself or someone else? She murmured, almost to herself, "This sketch tells a story, but not the one Mr. Blake wants us to believe." Chapter 8. The midnight train. The evening air in St. Mary Mead carried a chill that seeped through Miss Jane Marple's shawl as she sat by her cottage window. The Dannymoth ticket stub resting on her writing desk like a silent challenge. The torn scrap of paper found in Ruby Keane's room at the Majestic Hotel was stamped for 8:45 p.m. the night she died, pointing to a journey she never completed. Miss Marple's mind wove through the clues accumulated thus far. Ruby's staged body in the Bantry's library, the missing pearl earring, the forged letter implicating Colonel Bantry, Pamela Harper's charred remains in the quarry, the metal clasp from the woods, Conway Jefferson's affection for Ruby, and Basil Blake's tender sketch hidden behind a canvas. Each thread suggested a deliberate hand, but the ticket stub offered a new path. Ruby's final movements leading to Danemouth, Miss Marple decided to visit the Dannymoth railway station, a short trip from St. Mary Mead, to uncover what Ruby had been seeking that fateful night. She enlisted Tommy Pierce, the village taxi driver, whose curiosity about the murders was matched only by his eagerness to help. As the taxi rattled along the coastal road, the sea a dark shimmer under the moon, Tommy glanced at her in the rear view mirror. "Danemouth's a lively place, Miss Marple," he said, his freckled face lit by the dashboard. "Clubs, bars, all sorts. My cousin says Ruby Keane was a regular at some dive called the Blue Anchor. Reckon she was headed there." Miss Marple's lips twitched. "Perhaps, Tommy, but a train ticket suggests purpose, not a casual outing. Did your cousin ever see her with anyone at this club?" Tommy shrugged, navigating a curve. "He mentioned a chap once, tall, always in a dark coat, kept to the shadows, like he didn't want to be seen. Ruby seemed clingy with him, my cousin said." Miss Marple's heart quickened, her thoughts flashing to Elsie's account of Ruby arguing with a man in a long coat at the Majestic. "Clingy," she repeated. "That's interesting. Thank you, Tommy." The Dannymoth station was a modest affair, its platform lit by flickering lamps. The ticket office a small booth manned by a grizzled porter named Mr. Higgs. He was polishing his glasses when Miss Marple approached, her knitting basket swinging lightly on her arm. "Good evening, Mr. Higgs," she said, her voice warm but purposeful. "I'm inquiring about a train from the Majestic Hotel area, the 8:45 p.m. to Dannymoth 2 nights ago. A young woman, Ruby Keane, may have been on it." Mr. Higgs squinted, his weathered face creasing. "Ruby Keane, I heard about her. Terrible thing. I was on duty that night. Saw a girl matching her description, blonde, all dolled up in a sparkly dress. She was at the platform, right enough, but she didn't board alone." Miss Marple's needles paused in her basket, though she hadn't begun knitting. Not alone. "Who was with her?" "A man," Higgs said, leaning forward, his voice low. "Tall, dark coat, hat pulled low. Bought her ticket for her, handed it over like he was in a hurry. But he didn't get on the train. Just watched her go, then left. Seemed odd to me." Miss Marple's mind raced. The man in the long coat again. A recurring shadow in Ruby's final hours. "Did you see where he went after?" Higgs shook his head. Back toward the road, I reckon. There was a car waiting, a black one, but I didn't catch the make. Too dark. Miss Marple thanked him, her eyes drifting to the platform where Ruby had stood, clutching a ticket to Danimouth. The Blue Anchor, Tommy's cousin, had set a club where Ruby was known. She decided to visit it, hoping to trace the man who'd seen her off but stayed behind. The Blue Anchor was a dimly lit establishment on Danimouth's waterfront, its neon sign buzzing fitfully. The air inside was thick with cigarette smoke and the thump of a jukebox playing a brassy tune. Miss Marple, looking distinctly out of place in her tweed skirt and shawl, drew curious glances as she entered, her basket a quaint contrast to the sequined dresses and slick suits around her. She found the barman, a burly man with a scar above his eyebrow, wiping glasses with a rag that had seen better days. "Good evening," she said, her smile disarming. "I'm looking into the movements of a young woman, Ruby Keene, who frequented this club. She was here, perhaps, 2 nights ago." The barman's eyes narrowed, but he nodded. "Ruby, yeah. She was a regular, always dancing, drawing a crowd. Haven't seen her since. Well, you know. Heard she's dead." Miss Marple's voice was gentle, coaxing. "I'm so sorry. Did she come alone that night, or was she with someone?" The barman hesitated, glancing at a group of men in the corner, their laughter loud and forced. "She came in with a fellow, older, dark coat. They didn't stay long. She was upset, kept saying something about a promise broken. He hustled her out quick, like he didn't want trouble." Miss Marple's heart quickened. "Did you overhear anything else? A name, perhaps?" The barman shook his head. "Not a name, but she called him darling once, in a sharp way, like she was mad. They left around 9, maybe. That's all I know." Miss Marple thanked him and stepped outside, the sea air clearing the smoke from her lungs. Ruby had been at the Blue Anchor, arguing with the man in the long coat, just before her death. The ticket stub placed her at the station at 8:45 p.m., suggesting she'd gone straight from the club to the train or been taken there. But why Danimouth, and why didn't the man board with her? Back in St. Mary Mead, Miss Marple visited Dolly Bantry, who was pacing the drawing-room of Gossington Hall, her face pale with worry. The news of Pamela Harper's death had spread, and the village was alight with theories, many now pointing to Basil Blake's wild lifestyle. Dolly set a teapot down with a clatter, her hands unsteady. "Jane, it's getting worse," she said. "Mrs. Hartnell's saying Basil's involved, that he was seen near the quarry. And Arthur's still shaken about that letter." "What did you find in Danimouth?" Miss Marple settled into a chair, her knitting basket at her side. "Ruby was at the Blue Anchor, a club in Danimouth, with a man in a dark coat. They argued, and he bought her a train ticket but didn't board with her. It's the same man Elsie saw at the Majestic, I'm sure." Dolly's eyes widened. "A man in a dark coat. That's not much to go on, Jane. Half the men in England wear dark coats." Miss Marple's needles clicked softly. "True, but his behaviour is telling. He was with Ruby hours before her death, and he didn't want to be seen. I suspect he's connected to the Majestic perhaps, a guest like Conway Jefferson, or someone closer to Ruby's world." Dolly poured tea, her brow furrowed. "And Pamela, how does she fit in?" Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. "Pamela found something in the woods, a clasp, perhaps part of a necklace or bracelet. It may belong to Ruby or to someone who was with her. The man in the coat, the missing earring, the letter in your library, they're all part of a pattern, Dolly. Someone is orchestrating this, and they're very clever." As they sipped tea, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the train platform, the flickering lamps, and the man who'd watched Ruby board alone. He was a shadow, elusive but central, and his promises broken or kept had led Ruby to her death. She thought of Basil's sketch, Conway's affection, Mark Gaskell's restlessness, and the handkerchief with an R the web was tightening. But its centre remained hidden. Miss Marple set her cup down, her voice soft but firm. Ruby was running. Toward something or away from someone. "We must find that man, Dolly, before the web closes around us all." Chapter 9. The gossips clue. The late afternoon light filtered through the lace curtains of Miss Jane Marple's cottage, casting delicate shadows across the parlour where a small group of St. Mary Mead's most prolific gossips had gathered. For tea, the air was fragrant with the scent of freshly baked scones and Earl Grey, but the undercurrent of tension was palpable. To murders Ruby Keane's staged body in the Bantry's library and Pamela. Harper's charred remains in the quarry head set the village ablaze with speculation. Miss Marple, her knitting basket at her side, presided over the gathering with the serene air of a conductor orchestrating a symphony, though her sharp eyes missed nothing. The guests were carefully chosen. Mrs. Price, whose tongue was as sharp as her gardening trowel. Miss Weatherby, the bird-like spinster with a knack for overhearing secrets. Mrs. Hartnell, whose loud hats matched her louder opinions. And Mrs. Clement, the vicar's wife, whose gentle demeanour masked a keen ear for village whispers. Each woman sipped her tea, their voices a low hum of theories about Ruby Keane. Basil, Blake, and the mysterious man in the dark coat Miss Marple had traced to Danemouth, Mrs. Hartnell. Her hat, adorned with an improbable cluster of feathers, leaned forward, her teacup clinking against its saucer. I said to my Henry, "It's no surprise, really, that Basil Blake, with his wild parties and London friends, is mixed up in this. Why, I saw his car tearing through the village the night that poor guide girl was found." Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, a rhythm that seemed to steady. "The room, his car, you say, Mrs. Hartnell. That's interesting. Near the quarry, perhaps." Mrs. Hartnell's eyes gleamed, sensing an audience. "Not exactly, but close enough. Down by the old mill road, speeding like the devil was after him. I told Constable Reed, but he's too busy chasing shadows to listen." Miss Weatherby, her thin fingers clutching her cup, chimed in. "Basil's not the only one acting strange. I saw Mr. Pye, the florist, at the post office yesterday, looking like he'd seen a ghost. Dropped a whole stack of letters when Ruby's name came up." Miss Marple's lips twitched, her mind filing away the mention of Mr. Pye, whose nervous demeanour at the tea-room had already piqued her interest. "Poor Mr. Pye," she said, her voice mild. "He's always been a sensitive soul. Did he say anything about Ruby?" Mrs. Weatherby shook her head. "Not a word, but his hands were shaking like leaves. I reckon he knows something he's not telling." Mrs. Clement, stirring her tea, spoke softly. "It's all so dreadful. Ruby at the Bantrys, and now Pamela in the quarry. I keep thinking about Lily Carter, Pamela's friend. She's been so quiet at church, as if she's carrying a secret." Miss Marple's eyes sharpened behind her spectacles. Lily's mention of a shiny object in the woods, possibly the metal clasp she'd found, had already linked Pamela's death to Ruby's. She turned to Mrs. Price, who was unusually silent, her fingers fidgeting with a scone. "Mrs. Price, you mentioned seeing Ruby at the bus stop with a man. Have you remembered anything more?" Perhaps about the night Pamela was found. Mrs. Price's cheeks flushed, her eyes darting to the window. Well, now you mention it, I did see something odd that night. I was out walking my dog near the lane by the quarry. It was late, past 10, and I saw a car parked there, half hidden by the trees. A fancy one, dark, with a shiny grille. It sped off when my dog barked, but I couldn't see the driver. Miss Marple's heart quickened, though her expression remained serene. A fancy car, you say? That's most curious. Did it resemble any you know from the village? Mrs. Price hesitated, her voice dropping. It looked like the one Mark Gaskell drives, you know, Mr. Jefferson's son-in-law from the Majestic. But I wouldn't swear to it, Miss Marple. It was dark, and I was frazzled after all the talk of Ruby. The room fell silent, the weight of her words settling like dust. Mark Gaskell, with his restless demeanour and disdain for Ruby, was now tied to the quarry where Pamela's body was found. Miss Marple's needles paused, her mind racing. The car, the man in the dark coat, the metal clasp, the letter in the Bantry's library, they were threads in a tightening web. And Mark Gaskell was a name she couldn't ignore. Thank you, Mrs. Price, Miss Marple said, her voice gentle but firm. You've been most helpful. Now, do have another scone. As the women resumed their chatter, their theories growing Wildebasil as a secret smuggler, Conway Jefferson as a jilted lover, Miss Marple listened, her mind sifting truth from exaggeration. Mrs. Price's hesitation when mentioning rubies. Enemies suggested she knew more than she'd let on. Miss Marple resolved to speak with her privately later, perhaps over a garden chat where tongues loosened more easily. After the tea party, Miss Marple walked Mrs. Price to her gate, the evening, air crisp with the scent of fallen leaves. The village was quiet, save for the distant bark of a dog, and the sky glowed with the last hues of sunset. Miss Marple's basket swung lightly, but her thoughts were heavy with the new clue. Mrs. Price, she began, her tone as warm as a fireside, you mentioned Ruby looking nervous at the bus stop. Did she ever speak of enemies, or someone who might have wished her harm? Mrs. Price's fingers tightened on her scarf, her eyes avoiding Miss Marple's. Not enemies, exactly. But she did say something odd that day. I was passing by, pretending to adjust my hat, you know. And I heard her say to the man, "You can't keep me quiet forever." It sounded threatening, like she had something on him. Miss Marple's heart quickened. And the man, did you hear his voice, or see anything more? Mrs. Price shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. He spoke low, too low to hear. But he was angry, I could tell. His shoulders were all hunched, like he was holding himself back. Miss Marple nodded, her mind connecting Ruby's words to the argument Elsie overheard at the Majestic, and the man in the dark coat at the Blue Anchor. You've done well to remember, Mrs. Price. It's a small thing, but small things often unravel big secrets. As Mrs. Price hurried into her cottage, Miss Marple turned toward home, the quarry car now a vivid image in her mind. Mark Gaskell's car was a Rolls-Royce, dark and sleek, with a distinctive grille. If it was indeed his, it placed him near Pamela's reckless act, unlike Ruby's carefully staged murder. The contrast intrigued her, suggesting two hands at work, or one mind playing a complex game. That evening, Miss Marple joined Dolly Bantry at Gossington Hall, where the fire crackled in the drawing room, casting shadows that seemed to dance with secrets. Dolly was pale, her hands twisting a handkerchief as she recounted the villagers' latest fears. "Jane, they're saying it's a maniac now," she said, pouring tea with a clatter. 2 girls dead, and that car Mrs. Price sits got. Everyone pointing fingers at Mark Gaskell. Do you think he's involved? Miss Marple settled into a chair, her knitting needles resuming their rhythm. Mark is certainly interesting, Dolly. His car near the quarry, his dislike of Rubiette's suggestive. But I'm not convinced he's our killer. The letter in your library, the clasp in the woods, the man in the dark coat they point to. A plan, not a passion. Dolly's eyes widened. A plan. You mean someone's orchestrating all this? Miss Marple's needles clicked, a steady counterpoint to her thoughts. I do. Ruby's death was a performance meant to shock. Pamela's was hasty, a reaction to something she saw or found. The car ties Mark to the quarry, but it could be a misdirection, like the letter implicating Arthur. Dolly set her cup down, her voice trembling. But why our library, Jane? Why us? Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. That's the question, isn't it? Your home was chosen to send a message, or to hide a truth. Mrs. Price's clue about the car is a thread, but it's tangled with others: the ticket stub, the sketch, the handkerchief with an R. We must keep pulling, Dolly, until the knot unravels. As the firelight flickered, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to Mrs. Price's hesitation. The nervous glance when Ruby's enemies were mentioned. The village gossip had given her a vital clue, but it was the silences, the things left unsaid, that held the key. She murmured, almost to herself, gossip is a tangled web, but it always holds a thread of truth. Chapter 10. The Hidden Wealth. Morning sun broke through the clouds over St. Mary Mead, casting a fragile light on Miss Jane Marple's cottage, where she sat at her writing desk, her notes spread before her like a map of secrets. The mystery of Ruby Keane's murder and Pamela Harper's death had woven a complex web: the staged body in the Bantry's library, the missing pearl earring, the Danny Moth ticket stub, the forged letter implicating Colonel Bantry, the metal clasp in the woods, Conway Jefferson's affection for Ruby, Basil Blake's tender sketch, the man in the dark coat, and now the sighting of Mark Gaskell's car near the quarry. Each clue was a thread, but the latest Mrs. Price's hesitant mention of Ruby's threat to not stay quiet suggested a motive rooted in secrets. Someone was desperate to keep. Today, Miss Marple intended to pursue Conway Jefferson's connection to Ruby, prompted by a hunch about his wealth and its power to stir envy. She decided to return to the majestic hotel. But first, she stopped by Gossington Hall to confer with Dolly Bantry. The hall's drawing room was quiet, the police tape still barring the library, and Dolly was arranging roses in a vase, her movements brisk but betraying her unease. Jane. You're up early, Dolly said, snipping a stem with more force than necessary. The village is in a state. Mrs. Hartnell's convinced Mark Gaskell's a killer, and Arthur's avoiding everyone. That letter's made him a laughing stock. Miss Marple settled into a chair, her knitting basket at her side. Poor Arthur. But the letter was a plant, Dolly meant to mislead. I'm more interested in Conway Jefferson. His fondness for Ruby was unusual, and his wealth makes him a target for resentment. Have you heard anything about his affairs? Dolly's eyes widened. His affairs? Well, I know he's rich as Croesus, made his fortune in shipping. But there's talk he's been generous with young performers. Like Ruby, Mrs. Clement mentioned he was planning something big for her, a legacy, she said. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, her mind racing. A legacy, that's significant. If he altered his will to include Ruby, it would upset his family, Mark and Adelaide, particularly. Dolly set her scissors down, her face pale. "You think his will has something to do with Ruby's death?" "I think," Miss Marple said, "that money is a powerful motive. We must learn more about Mr. Jefferson's intentions. I'm heading to the Majestic to speak with him again, but first, I'd like to see if the hotel has a solicitor's office nearby. Wills are often drafted close to where one stays." The Majestic Hotel was bustling when Miss Marple arrived, its lobby filled with guests checking out, their suitcases piled high. She bypassed the reception desk, having learned from Tommy Pierce that a solicitor's office, Grayson and Sons, was located just across the street. The office was a narrow building with a brass plaque, its interior smelling of ink and old leather. Mr. Grayson, a bespectacled man with a precise manner, greeted her with polite curiosity. "Miss Marple," he said, offering her a seat. "I understand you're inquiring about a client. I'm bound by confidentiality, but I'll help where I can." Miss Marple's smile was disarming. "Of course, Mr. Grayson. I'm looking into the tragic death of Ruby Keene, a friend of Mr. Conway Jefferson. I believe he may have made arrangements for her, perhaps a will or trust." Grayson's fingers twitched, a flicker of unease crossing his face. "Mr. Jefferson is a valued client. I can confirm he visited us recently, but the details are private. I will say he was concerned about his estate, particularly its distribution." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed behind her spectacles. "Concerned? Did he mention Ruby specifically?" Grayson hesitated, then nodded. "He spoke of a young woman, yes. He wished to make provisions for her to ensure her future. The documents were drawn up, but—" he paused, choosing his words. "A page was misplaced, it seems. We're still looking into it." Miss Marple's heart quickened. A missing page in a will was no accident, not in a case like this. "When was this will signed?" she asked. "The day before Miss Keene's death," Grayson said, his voice low. Mr. Jefferson was insistent it be finalized quickly. Miss Marple thanked him and stepped outside, her mind buzzing. A will altered to include Ruby, signed the day before her murder, with a page missing it was a motive as clear as day. Mark Gaskell and Adelaide Jefferson stood to lose if Ruby inherited a fortune. But who had access to the will, and who could have hidden that page? Back at the Majestic, Miss Marple found Conway Jefferson in the hotel's private lounge, a wood-panelled room with a view of the sea. He was alone, his wheelchair by a table cluttered with newspapers, his face etched with grief. Mark and Adelaide were absent, a fact Miss Marple noted with interest. "Miss Marple," Jefferson said, his voice weary but welcoming. "You've been asking questions, I hear. I suppose you want to know about Ruby." Miss Marple settled across from him, her knitting basket on her lap. "I do, Mr. Jefferson. I understand you planned to adopt her, or perhaps include her in your will. That's a significant decision." Jefferson's hands clenched, his eyes distant. "She was like a daughter to me. My own children are gone, and Mark and Adelaide. They're family, but they've their own lives. Ruby needed someone, and I wanted to give her a chance. I had my solicitor draw up a new will, leaving her a substantial sum." Miss Marple's needles clicked, a soothing rhythm. "And your family, were they aware of this?" Jefferson's jaw tightened. "They knew I was fond of her. Mark was skeptical, thought she was after my money. Adelaide was kinder, but I could tell it rankled her. I signed the will 2 days ago, but I haven't told them yet." Miss Marple's heart quickened. 2 days ago, the day before Ruby's death. Jefferson nodded, his eyes narrowing. "You think that's why she was killed?" For my money? It's possible, Miss Marple said gently. A will can stir strong feelings, especially when it changes things. Was anyone else present when you signed it? Jefferson frowned, his fingers tapping the arm of his chair. Just my solicitor, Grayson, and a clerk. And Ruby briefly. She stopped by to thank me. She was so happy, Miss Marple. It breaks my heart. Miss Marple's mind raced. Ruby's presence at the signing placed her in the solicitor's office, where the missing page could have been taken. Had someone followed her, or overheard? She thought of Mark's restless demeanor, Adelaide's strained smile, and the handkerchief with an R. Did Ruby leave anything behind that day? A note, perhaps, or a belonging? Jefferson shook his head. Not that I saw. But she was wearing those pearl earrings, a gift from me. She loved them. Miss Marple's needles paused, her thoughts snapping to the single earring found with Ruby's body. Both earrings? She asked. Jefferson frowned. I think so. Why? Just a thought, Miss Marple said, her voice mild. The missing earring, the missing will page, the man in the dark coat, they were pieces of a puzzle, and Jefferson's will was at its heart. That evening, Miss Marple returned to Gossington Hall, where Dolly Bantry was waiting in the drawing room, her face pale with worry. The village was abuzz with rumours, and the police were now questioning Mark Gaskell about his car's sighting near the quarry. Jane, it's getting out of hand, Dolly said, pouring tea with a shaky hand. Inspector Slacks at the majestic, hounding Mark, and Arthur's beside himself, thinking everyone suspects him because of that wretched letter. Miss Marple settled into a chair, her knitting resuming its rhythm. The letter was a distraction, Dolly, but the will is the key. Conway Jefferson changed it to include Ruby, and a page is missing. Someone didn't want that will to stand. Dolly's eyes widened. You think Mark or Adelaide tampered with it? It's possible, Miss Marple said. Mark's car. Near the quarry, his dislike of Rubiette's suggestive, but the missing page suggests someone with access to the solicitor's office. We need to know who was there that day. Dolly set her cup down, her jaw set. I'll ask around, Jane. Someone at the hotel must know something. But what about Pamela? How does she fit in? Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. Pamela found something. In the woods a clasp, perhaps part of Ruby's jewelry. Her death was no accident. She was silenced. The will, the earring, the car, they're all part of a plan, Dolly, but it's a plan with cracks. As the fire crackled, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the solicitor's office. The missing page, and the man in the dark coat. Someone had orchestrated Ruby's death to protect a fortune, and Pamela's to cover their tracks. But the missing page was a clue they hadn't meant to leave behind. She murmured, almost to herself, a will is a motive, but a missing page is a mystery. Chapter 11. The dancers double the morning fog draped St. Mary Mead in a ghostly veil, softening the edges of the village's thatched cottages and lending an air of secrecy to the unfolding mystery. Miss Jane Marple sat in her parlour, her knitting needles idle as she pored over her notes, the weight of 2 murders pressing heavily on her mind. Ruby Keane's staged body in the Bantry's library, the missing pearl earring, the Danima ticket stub, the forged letter implicating Colonel Bantry. Pamela Harper's charred remains in the quarry, the metal clasp in the woods. Conway Jefferson's altered will, Basil Blake's hidden sketch, the man in the dark coat, and Mark Gaskell's car near the quarry all pointed to a carefully woven plot. The missing page of Jefferson's will had sharpened the motive, but a new piece of information, delivered by a breathless Tommy Pierce at dawn, had turned the puzzle on its head. A witness claimed to have seen Ruby Keene alive at the Majestic Hotel after her supposed time of death. Miss Marple tucked her notes into her basket and set out for Gossington Hall, where Dolly Bantry was waiting, her face a mix of exasperation and curiosity. The drawing room was warm, the fire crackling, but Dolly's hands fidgeted with a cushion as she recounted the latest village buzz. "Jane, it's madness," Dolly said, her voice sharp. "Tommy says some barmaid at the Majestic saw Ruby dancing. At midnight, hours after the police say she was killed. How can that be? Are they saying she wasn't dead?" Miss Marple settled into a chair, her knitting basket at her side. "Not madness, Dolly, but a mystery. The police estimate Ruby died around 9 or 10, based on the doctor's report. If she was seen at midnight, either the doctor's wrong or it wasn't Ruby." Dolly's eyes widened. "Not Ruby, you mean a double?" Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, a rhythm that steadied her thoughts. "It's possible, a look-alike perhaps, or someone dressed to pass as her. It would explain why her body was staged so carefully. Someone wanted us to believe Ruby was dead when she wasn't, or to cover for someone else." Dolly leaned forward, her cushion forgotten. "But who and why?" Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. "That's what we must find out. I'm going to the Majestic to speak with this barmaid, and I'd like to see Ruby's room again there, maybe something we missed." The Majestic Hotel's lobby was quieter than usual, the guests subdued by the weight of 2 murders. Miss Marple found the barmaid, a young woman named Clara with a freckled face and nervous hands, wiping down tables in the hotel's lounge. Clara's eyes darted to the door as Miss Marple approached, her knitting basket swinging lightly. "Good morning, Clara," Miss Marple said, her smile disarming. "I understand you saw Ruby Keene the night she died. Can you tell me about it?" Clara's hands froze, her cloth twisting in her fingers. I thought it was her, miss. She was in the ballroom, dancing with some fellow. Was past midnight, and she was wearing that green dress, the one she always wore. But now they're saying she was dead by then, so I must have been mistaken." Miss Marple's voice was gentle, coaxing. "Not mistaken, perhaps, but misled. Describe her, if you would. Every detail." Clara frowned, her brow creasing. "She looked like ruby blonde hair, all done up, same height, but her makeup was heavier, like she was trying too hard. And her laugh, it wasn't Ruby's, now I think on it. Ruby's laugh was soft, like bells. This girl's was loud, forced." Miss Marple's heart quickened. "And the man she was with, did you recognize him?" Clara shook her head. "He was tall, kept his face turned away, wore a dark suit, not a coat like they're saying. They danced a bit, then left through the side door. I didn't think much of it till the police came asking." Miss Marple thanked her and made her way to Ruby's room, now unsealed by the police, but still cordoned off. The small space was as she'd last seen it: narrow bed, chipped dresser, mirror with faded ribbons, but the air felt different, as if the room itself held its breath. She examined the dresser, her fingers tracing the edges where the missing photograph had once been pinned. The police had taken Ruby's belongings, but Miss Marple's sharp eyes caught a glint in a crack between the floorboards. She knelt, her joints protesting, and retrieved a second pearl earring, identical to the one found with Ruby's body, but with a subtle difference: a tiny scratch on the clasp, barely visible. 2 earrings. 2 girls, Miss Marple murmured, slipping the earring into her pocket. The scratch suggested wear, perhaps by someone else, someone posing as Ruby, a double, as she'd suspected, but who and why? Back in the lobby, Miss Marple sought out Mr. Prescott, the hotel manager, who was sorting papers with a harried air. His mustache quivered as he greeted her, his eyes wary. "Miss Marple, you're becoming a regular," he said, forcing a smile. "The police have turned this place upside down. What now?" Miss Marple's voice was mild but firm. "I've heard a curious story, Mr. Prescott. A barmaid saw Ruby, or someone like her, dancing here after midnight the night she died. Were there other girls at the hotel who resembled her?" Prescott's fingers paused, his face paling. "A double. Well, we've had dancers come and go, but none, I'd say, looked like Ruby. She was distinctive, but there was a girl, Josie Turner, who filled in for her once or twice. Same build, blonde hair. Left a month ago, though." Miss Marple. Needles resumed their clicking, her mind racing. Josie Turner. Did she ever wear Ruby's jewelry, perhaps as part of her act? Prescott frowned. "Not that I know, but Ruby was careless with her things, left earrings, scarves, all over. Someone could have borrowed them." Miss Marple thanked him and stepped outside, the sea air sharp against her face. Josie Turner, a potential look-alike, added a new layer to the mystery. Had she been the girl dancing at midnight, wearing Ruby's dress and earrings? And if so, was she a willing participant or a pawn in a larger scheme? That evening, Miss Marple joined Dolly Bantry at Gossington Hall, where the fire cast flickering shadows across the drawing room. Dolly was pacing, her hands twisting a scarf as she recounted the villagers' latest rumors. "Jane, they're saying Ruby's ghost is haunting the Majestic," Dolly said, her voice half amused, half nervous. "All because of that barmaid's story. Do you really think it was someone else?" Miss Marple settled into a chair, her knitting basket at her side. "Not a ghost, Dolly, but a double. Clara saw a girl who looked like Ruby, but wasn't. The second earring I found confirms it's similar, but not identical. Someone wanted us to believe Ruby was alive later than she was, perhaps to confuse the timeline." Dolly's eyes widened. "To protect the killer, or to frame someone?" "Both, perhaps," Miss Marple said, her needles clicking. "The will, the letter, the car at the quarry, they're all misdirections. Josie Turner, a dancer who resembled Ruby, may be the key. If she was at the Majestic that night, she could lead us to the man in the dark coat." Dolly set her scarf down, her jaw set. "Then we find this Josie. I'll ask around. Someone must know where she went." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. "Be discreet, Dolly. Whoever planned this is watching, and they've already silenced Pamela for what she knew. The earring, the double, the wilder pieces of a clever game, but it's a game we're beginning to understand." As the fire crackled, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the scratched earring, the midnight dancer, and the missing Josie Turner. Ruby's death was a performance, Pamela's a desperate cover-up, and the double was a shadow cast to obscure the truth. She murmured, almost to herself, 2 earrings, 2 girls, but only one body in the library. Chapter 12. The missing dancer. The morning mist swirled around St. Mary Mead, lending an ethereal quality to the village's quiet lanes as Miss Jane Marple stepped out of her cottage, her knitting basket tucked under her arm. The mystery of Ruby Keane's murder in Gossington Hall's library and Pamela Harper's death in the quarry had grown more intricate with each clue: the missing pearl earring, the Dannymoth ticket stub, the forged letter implicating Colonel Bantry, the metal clasp in the woods, Conway Jefferson's altered will, Basil Blake's hidden sketch, the man in the dark coat, Mark Gaskell's car near the quarry, and the startling possibility of a look-alike, Josie Turner, seen dancing at the Majestic Hotel after Ruby's supposed time of death. The second pearl earring, with its scratched clasp, had confirmed the presence of a double, and Miss Marple was determined to find Josie, whose role witting or unwitting held the key to unraveling the web of deceit. Miss Marple decided to begin at the Majestic Hotel, hoping to uncover more about Josie Turner's departure and her connection to Ruby. She enlisted Tommy Pierce's taxi, the young driver's curiosity undimmed by the village's growing fear. As they drove along the coastal road, the sea a restless grey under the overcast sky, Tommy glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "Miss Marple, reckon this Josie's the key to it all?" he asked, his freckled face eager. "My cousin at the Majestic says she was a bit of a mystery, kept to herself, never stayed long." Miss Marple's lips twitched, her eyes on the passing hedgerows. "Josie may indeed be key. Tommy, did your cousin ever see her with Ruby, or perhaps with a particular gentleman?" Tommy frowned, navigating a bend. "Not with Ruby, but he said Josie was chummy with one of the hotel's regulessa, tall chap, always in a dark suit. Sounded like he had money, the way he tipped." Miss Marple's heart quickened her thoughts, flashing to the man in the dark coat who'd haunted Ruby's final hours. "A dark suit, you say? That's interesting. Did your cousin catch a name?" Tommy shook his head. "No name, but he said the chap was at the hotel the night Ruby died. Left in a hurry, like he'd seen a ghost." Miss Marple nodded, filing this away as the taxi pulled into the Majestic's gravel courtyard. The hotel's whitewashed facade seemed less grand under the grey sky, its windows reflecting the somber mood within. She thanked Tommy and stepped into the lobby, where the air was thick with the scent of polish and whispered conversations. At the reception desk, Miss Marple found Mr. Prescott, the manager, looking more frazzled than ever, his moustache drooping as he sorted through a stack of telegrams. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice strained, "you're back. The police are still here, asking about Ruby and that poor guide girl. What now?" Miss Marple's smile was gentle but purposeful. "I'm inquiring about Josie Turner, a dancer, who worked here briefly. I understand she resembled Ruby Keene. Can you tell me where she went after leaving the hotel?" Prescott's fingers paused, his eyes darting to the side. "Josie, she was only here a month or two. Quiet girl, good dancer, but not like Ruby. Sparkling, she left suddenly, said she had a job in London, didn't leave an address." Miss Marple's needles clicked softly in her basket, though she hadn't begun knitting. "No address. That's curious. Did she have any particular friends among the staff, or perhaps a visitor who stood out?" Prescott hesitated, then leaned closer, his voice low. "There was a man who came to see her a few times. Tall, dark suit, kept his hat low. I thought he was a talent scout, the way he watched her dance. He was here the night Ruby died, but I didn't see him with Josie." Miss Marple's heart quickened, the man in the dark suit or coat emerging again as a central figure. And Josie's belongings. Did she leave anything behind? Prescott shook his head. "She cleared out her room, but the police checked it anyway. Nothing there but a few hairpins and a torn dance card." Miss Marple thanked him and made her way to the ballroom, where Clara, the barmaid, who'd seen the Ruby double dancing at midnight, was sweeping the floor. Clara's freckled face brightened at Miss Marple's approach, though her eyes held a flicker of unease. "Miss Marple," Clara said, leaning on her broom, "you're still asking about Ruby. I told the police what I saw that girl dancing, looking like her but not quite right. Miss Marple's voice was gentle, coaxing. You did well, Clara. I believe that girl was Josie Turner. Did you ever see her with anyone unusual, perhaps? The man in the dark suit Mr. Prescott mentioned. Clara's brow furrowed, her fingers tightening on the broom. Josie was it. I saw her once or twice, filling in for Ruby. She was with a man, yes, tall, dark suit, like you said. They were arguing in the corridor, the night before Ruby died. She said something like, "You can't make me do it again." I didn't think much of it then. Miss Marple's needles paused, her mind racing. Josie's words suggested coercion, perhaps tied to the midnight dance meant to confuse Ruby's timeline. And the night of the dance, she prompted, was Josie wearing anything distinctive? Clara nodded, her voice hesitant. She had a scarf, red silk, tied around her neck. Ruby never wore scarves like that. Tit stood out. Miss Marple thanked her and stepped outside, the red scarf a vivid image in her mind. A scarf could conceal marks, or identity, and its presence. Aunt Josie suggested a deliberate attempt to mimic Ruby, while adding a personal touch. But where was Josie now, and was she a victim or a conspirator? Determined to trace Josie, Miss Marple visited the Dannemouth post office, hoping to find a forwarding address or a clue to her whereabouts. The postmistress, a plump woman named Mrs. Baxter, greeted her with a curious smile, her hands busy sorting letters. "Miss Marple, you're far from home," Mrs. Baxter said, pushing a stray curl behind her ear. "What brings you here?" Miss Marple's smile was disarming. "I'm looking for a young woman, Josie Turner, who worked at the Majestic Hotel. She may have left for London recently. Did she receive or send any mail through here?" Mrs. Baxter's eyes gleamed, sensing a story. "Josie Turner, I remember. Her, she picked up a letter here, 2 days ago. Addressed to her, care of the post office. Looked like it came from a solicitor fancy envelope, sealed with wax." Miss Marple's heart quickened. 2 days ago. That's after Ruby's death. Did you see where she went after? Mrs. Baxter shook her head. She was in a hurry, clutching that letter like it was gold. Headed toward the train station, I think. But there was something else. Her hand was bandaged, like she'd hurt it. Miss Marple thanked her, her mind buzzing. Josie, alive, and in Dannemouth after Ruby's murder, receiving a solicitor's letter. Suggested she was entangled in the will's missing page or something more sinister. The bandaged hand was a new detail, possibly a mark of struggle or accident. Miss Marple resolved to check the train station for any record of Josie's departure. At the Dannemouth station, Mr. Higgs, the grizzled porter, was sweeping the platform when Miss Marple approached. "Back again, Miss Marple," he said, his weathered face creasing into a grin. "Still chasing Ruby Keane's ghost?" Miss Marple's voice was mild but probing. "Not a ghost, Mr. Higgs, but a dancer named Josie Turner. She may have taken a train from here 2 days ago, blonde, perhaps with a bandaged hand." "Did you see her?" Higgs scratched his chin, his eyes narrowing. I saw a girl like that. Blonde, nervous, kept her scarf tight around her neck. Bought a ticket to London, one-way, early morning train. She was looking over her shoulder, like someone was after her." Miss Marple's heart quickened. And was anyone with her? Higgs shook his head. "Alone, far as I could tell, but there was a car idling by the road, a dark one. Fancy, didn't see the driver, but it followed the train out of sight." Miss Marple thanked him, the dark car echoing Mark Gaskell's Rolls-Royce, spotted near the quarry. Josie's flight to London, her bandaged hand, and the solicitor's letter painted a picture of a woman on the run, perhaps from the same hand that had silenced Ruby and Pamela. But the letter intrigued her most. Could it be the missing page of Jefferson's will, or something else? That evening, Miss Marple joined Dolly Bantry at Gossington Hall, where the drawing-room's fire cast a warm glow against the gathering dusk. Dolly was restless, her fingers twisting a napkin as she recounted the villagers' latest fears. "Jane, they're saying Josie's the killer now," Dolly said, pouring tea with a clatter. "Mrs. Hartnell swears she saw her sneaking around the Majestic, plotting with that man in the dark coat. Is she really involved?" Miss Marple settled into a chair, her knitting needles resuming their rhythm. "Josie is involved, Dolly, but I suspect she's more victim than villain. She was seen in Dannymouth after Ruby's death, receiving a solicitor's letter, her hand bandaged. She fled to London, pursued by a dark car, possibly Mark Gaskell's." Dolly's eyes widened. Mark again, and a solicitor's letter. Could it be the will? Miss Marple's needles clicked, her thoughts sharp. "Perhaps, but I suspect it's a forged document meant to complicate Jefferson's estate. The double at the Majestic, the missing page, the bandaged hand, they're signs of a desperate plan, Dolly. Josie knows something, and someone wants her silenced." Dolly set her cup down, her jaw set. "Then we find her, Jane. If she's in London, we can track her down." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. "We will, but carefully. The man in the dark coat, the car, the letter, they're closing in on her and us. The truth is near, Dolly, but it's dangerous." As the fire crackled, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to Josie Turner, the dancer who'd stepped into Ruby's shoes, perhaps literally, and now ran from a shadow that had claimed to lives. The solicitor's letter, the bandaged hand, and the dark car were threads in a tightening web, but the spider remained hidden. She murmured, almost to herself, "A dancer's double, a forged page, and a flight to London. The stage is set, but the curtain hasn't fallen." Chapter 13. The London lead, the London morning, was a cacophony of hansom cabs, newspaper boys, and the clatter of trams as Miss Jane Marple stepped off the train at Paddington Station, her knitting basket tucked securely under her arm. The fog of St. Mary Mead had given way to the city's sooty haze, but her mind was clear, focused on the elusive Josie Turner, the dancer who'd fled Dannymouth with a solicitor's letter and a bandaged hand. The mystery of Ruby Keane's murder in the Bantry's library and Pamela Harper's death in the quarry had woven a complex tapestry of clues. The missing pearl earring, the Dannymouth ticket stub, the forged letter implicating Colonel Bantry, the metal clasp in the woods, Conway Jefferson's altered will, Basil Blake's hidden sketch, the man in the dark coat, Mark Gaskell's secret car near the quarry, and Josie's role as Ruby's double at the midnight dance. Josie's flight to London, pursued by a dark car, suggested she held a critical piece of the forged document that could unravel the conspiracy behind the murders. Miss Marple was determined to find her before the killer did. She had enlisted Dolly Bantry's help to arrange a stay at a modest boarding house in Bloomsbury, run by Dolly's old school friend, Mrs. Ellis, who knew the city's theatrical circles where Josie might hide. As Miss Marple settled into the boarding house's cosy parlour, Mrs. Ellis, a plump woman with a warm smile and a penchant for gossip, poured tea, her eyes bright with curiosity. "Miss Marple, Dolly says, you're chasing a dancer," Mrs. Ellis said, handing her a cup. "London's full of them, but I know the stage folk." "What's this girl like?" Miss Marple's smile was disarming, her knitting needles clicking softly. "Josie Turner, blonde, Slight. Recently at the Majestic Hotel. In Danimouth. She left for London 2 days ago, possibly with a bandaged hand, carrying a letter from a solicitor. She may be hiding in a theatre or lodging house. Mrs. Ellis's brow furrowed, her fingers tapping the teapot. Josie Turner. Doesn't ring a bell, but there's a new girl at the Starlight Theatre, just off Drury Lane. Blonde, keeps to herself, started yesterday. They say she's got a limp, though not a bandaged hand. Miss Marple's heart quickened. The limp possibly a misreported injury. A limp, that's interesting. Could you arrange for me to visit the theatre, Mrs. Ellis? Discreetly, of course. Mrs. Ellis nodded, her smile conspiratorial. I know the stage manager, Mr. Finch. I'll get you in for tonight's rehearsal. But be careful, Miss Marple, those theatre folk have secrets thicker than stage paint. The Starlight Theatre was a faded gem, its velvet curtains frayed but its stage alive with the energy of rehearsal. Miss Marple, guided by Mr. Finch, a wiry man with a cigarette dangling from his lips, slipped into the back row, her basket on her lap. The dancers were practicing a lively number, their sequins catching the gaslights. But Miss Marple's eyes locked on a blonde girl at the edge. Of the chorus, she was slight, her movements precise but cautious, favouring her right leg. Her neck was bare, no scarf in sight, but her left hand was wrapped in a thin bandage, barely visible under her sleeve. That's her, Miss Marple murmured, her needles pausing. Josie Turner, or someone very like her, was here, hiding in plain sight. She watched as Josie glanced nervously at the wings, where a tall man in a dark suit lingered, his face obscured by a newspaper. Miss Marple's heart quickened. The man in the dark coat, or his counterpart in a suit, was still a shadow in this mystery. After rehearsal, Miss Marple approached Josie backstage, where the girl was adjusting her costume, her face pale under the stage makeup. Miss Turner, Miss Marple said, her voice gentle but firm. I'm Jane Marple, from St. Mary Mead. I'd like to talk about Ruby Keene. Josie's hand froze, her eyes darting to the door. I don't know any Ruby, she stammered, her voice high. You've got the wrong girl, Miss Marple. Smile was serene, but her eyes were sharp. I think not, my dear. You were seen at the Majestic, dancing at midnight, wearing Ruby's dress, and you received a letter in Danimouth from a solicitor. You're in danger, Josie, and I want to help. Josie's shoulders slumped, her bandaged hand trembling. I didn't want any of this, she whispered. They made me do it, dress like her, dance like her, said it was just a prank, but then Ruby was dead, and I knew it wasn't a game. Miss Marple's needles resumed their clicking, a soothing rhythm. Who made you, Josie? The man in the dark suit. Josie nodded, her voice barely audible. He said his name was Edwards, but I don't believe it. He paid me to act as Ruby that night, to make people think she was alive later. He gave me her earrings, her dress, even her scarf, but I didn't know she'd be killed. Miss Marple's heart quickened. The second earrings, scratched clasp, now explained, and the letter you received. What was it? Josie's eyes filled with tears. A copy of a will page, Mr. Jefferson's. It said Ruby was to get half his estate. Edwards told me to keep it safe, said it'd protect me. But it's a fake. I saw the original at the solicitor's, and the signatures didn't match. Miss Marple's mind raced, the forged will page a critical clue. Where is it now, Josie? Josie reached into her costume, pulling out a crumpled envelope, its wax seal broken. Here, I was going to burn it, but I couldn't. I'm scared. Miss Marple, he's following me. Saw him outside the theatre. Miss Marple took the envelope, her fingers steady despite the weight of its contents. The page inside was typed, with Jefferson's signature at the bottom. But the ink was uneven, the paper slightly yellowed, clear signs of forgery. "You've been very brave, Josie," she said. "Stay here, and don't speak to anyone. See you're safe." As she left the theatre, Miss Marple glanced back, noting the man in the dark suit had vanished. She tucked the forged page into her basket, her thoughts churning. Edwards, or whatever his true name was, had orchestrated the double act to confuse Ruby's timeline, and the forged will page was meant to either discredit the original or secure a fortune. But Josie's fear suggested he was tying up loose ends, and Pamela's death in the quarry proved his ruthlessness. Back at the boarding house, Miss Marple shared her findings with Mrs. Ellis, who was waiting with a fresh pot of tea and a plate of biscuits. The parlour was quiet, the city's hum muted by thick curtains, and Mrs. Ellis listened, her eyes wide. "A forged will," she said, her voice hushed. "That's wicked, Miss Marple. And this Edwards do you think he's working alone?" Miss Marple's needles clicked, her eyes distant. "I doubt it, Mrs. Ellis. The forged page required access to Jefferson's solicitor, and the murders required planning. Mark Gaskell's car near the quarry, Basil Blake's sketch. The man in the dark coats, they're connected, but Edwards is the shadow pulling the strings." Mrs. Ellis leaned forward, her voice low. "There's a man staying at the hotel across the street. Tall, dark suit, keeps odd hours. Could be your Edwards. I saw him yesterday, reading a telegram, looking like he'd swallowed a lemon." Miss Marple's heart quickened. "A telegram, that's useful. Could you find out where it came from, Mrs. Ellis?" "Discreetly, of course." Mrs. Ellis nodded, her smile conspiratorial. "I'll have a word with the hotel clerk. He owes me a favor." That evening, Miss Marple telephoned Dolly Bantry, who was pacing Gossington Hall's drawing room, her voice crackling with worry over the line. "Jane, you're in London chasing this Josie girl. The village is in a panic, Inspector. Slacks arrested Mark Gaskell, saying his car's tire tracks match the quarry. Is Josie the killer?" Miss Marple's voice was calm, her knitting basket at her side. "Not the killer, Dolly, but a pawn. She was coerced into posing as Ruby, and she has a forged will page, meant to disrupt Jefferson's estate. The man behind it, Edwards, is here in London, and I suspect he's tied to Mark, or someone at the Majestic." Dolly's gasp was audible. A forged will. That's why Ruby was killed, to stop her inheritance. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. Exactly, and Pamela was killed because she found something, perhaps the clasp, or saw Edwards. The forged page, Josie's fear, the dark car there closing in. "Dolly, but we're closer to the truth." Dolly's voice was firm. "What do we do, Jane? Mark's in custody, but if he's not the killer, who is?" Miss Marple's needles clicked, her thoughts sharp. "We protect Josie, and we find Edwards. Mrs. Ellis is checking a telegram. He received it, may lead us to him. The web is unraveling, Dolly, but the spider is still hidden." As she hung up, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the forged page, Josie's bandaged hand, and the man in the dark suit. London's shadows held the key to the murders, but the danger was closer than ever. She murmured, almost to herself, "A forged page, a frightened dancer, and a shadow in the city. The truth is near, but it bites." Chapter 14. The spider's web, the London dusk, cast long shadows across Bloomsbury's cobbled streets, as Miss Jane Marple sat in Mrs. Ellis's boarding house, her knitting needles clicking softly. the forged will page resting on the table before her. The mystery of Ruby Keane's murder in Gossington Hall's library and Pamela Harper's death in the quarry had woven an intricate web of clues. The missing pearl earring, the Danamouth ticket stub, the forged letter implicating Colonel Bantry, the metal clasp in the woods, Conway Jefferson's altered will, Basil Blake's hidden sketch, the man in the dark coat, Mark Gaskell's car near the quarry, Josie Turner's role as Ruby's double, and the forged document Josie had carried to London. The elusive Edwards, who'd coerced Josie into posing as Ruby, was the final thread, and Miss Marple was determined to unmask him before he struck again. Mrs. Alice's lead on a telegram at the hotel across the street offered a chance. To close the net, Mrs. Ellis bustled into the parlour, her face flushed with excitement, clutching a slip of paper. Miss Marple, the hotel clerk, came through, she said, handing over a note. The telegram was sent to a Mr. Edward Grayson, same name as the solicitor, but a different address. It's from Danamouth, signed by someone called A. It says, meet at the Starlight. Urgent, she knows. Miss Marple's heart quickened, her needles pausing. Edward Grayson, not the solicitor, but a relative, perhaps a son or nephew, posing as Edwards. The telegram's cryptic message suggested Josie's knowledge of the forged will had made her a target. Thank you, Mrs. Ellis, she said, her voice calm but firm. I must return to the Starlight Theatre. Josie's in danger, and I suspect our killer is too. Mrs. Ellis's eyes widened. You're not going alone, are you? That man's dangerous. Miss Marple's smile was serene. Not alone, my dear. I've telephoned Inspector Slack. He's meeting me there with reinforcements. But we must act quickly. The Starlight Theatre was dark when Miss Marple arrived, its stage empty, the gaslights dimmed to a flicker. Inspector Slack, looking more harried than ever, waited in the foyer with 2 constables, his scowl deepening as he spotted her knitting basket. Miss Marple, this had better be good, he said. We've got Mark Gaskell in custody, and his car matches the quarry tracks. You're saying he's not our man? Miss Marple's voice was mild but resolute. Mark's involved, Inspector, but he's not the spider in this web. Edward Grayson, posing as Edwards, orchestrated Ruby's murder and Pamela's too. Protect a fortune. Josie Turner, who posed as Ruby, has a forged will page that proves it. He's here, I'm certain, to silence her. Slack grunted, unconvinced but willing to follow. Where's this Josie, then? Miss Marple led them backstage, where the air was thick with the scent of grease paint and dust. Josie was in her dressing room, her face pale, her bandaged hand clutching a red scarf. She jumped as Miss Marple entered, her eyes wide with fear. Miss Marple, he's here, Josie whispered, her voice trembling. I saw him in the wings, watching me. He knows I have the page. Miss Marple's hand rested gently on Josie's shoulder. You're safe now, my dear. The police are here. Show me where you saw him. Josie pointed to a narrow corridor leading to the stage. Slack signaled his constables, and they moved quietly, their footsteps muffled by the threadbare carpet. Miss Marple followed, her basket swinging lightly, her eyes scanning the shadows. A faint creak echoed from the wings, and she caught a glimpse of a tall figure in a dark suit, his face obscured by a hat. He froze, then bolted toward a side exit. Stop him, Slack shouted, the constables giving chase. The man Edward Grayson dodged a prop table, but one constable tackled him, pinning him to the floor. His hat fell, revealing a lean face, with sharp cheekbones and cold eyes. A younger version of the solicitor, Mr. Grayson. Miss Marple approached, her voice calm but piercing. Mr. Grayson, or shall I say, Edwards, you've been very clever, but the web you wove has caught you. Edward's eyes narrowed, his voice a hiss. You've got nothing, old woman. It's all conjecture. Miss Marple's smile was serene as she produced the forged will page from her basket. Not conjecture, Mr. Grayson. This page, forged, to discredit Mr. Jefferson's true will, was meant to secure your inheritance. Ruby Keene was to inherit half his estate, a fortune you couldn't bear to lose. You killed her, staged her body in the Bantry's library to cast suspicion, and used Josie to confuse the timeline. Slack, holding the forged page, frowned, and the girl in the quarry, Pamela Harper. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. Pamela found the metal clasp in the woods, part of Ruby's jewelry, dropped during her murder. She saw you, or something, incriminating, and you silenced her, burning the car to hide the evidence. Mark Gaskell's car was a convenient misdirection. You borrowed it, didn't you? Edward's face twisted, but he remained silent. Josie, trembling, spoke up. He made me wear her dress, her earrings, said it was a prank, but when Ruby died, I knew. He threatened me, said I'd end up like her if I talked. Slack handcuffed. Edward, his scowl softening. You've done it again, Miss Marple. But how'd you know it was him? Miss Marple's needles resumed their clicking, a soothing rhythm. The clues told the story, Inspector. The letter in the Bantry's library was too theatrical, meant to point at Colonel Bantry. The pearl earring, one scratched, suggested a double Josie. The Dannymoth ticket stub placed Ruby with a man in a dark coat, and Mrs. Price's sighting of Mark's car at the quarry was too convenient. The forged will page, missing from Grayson's office, tied it to Edward, a junior solicitor with access and motive. His telegram, signed A, was from Adelaide Jefferson, his accomplice, who resented Ruby's place in Conway's heart. Josie's eyes widened. Adelaide, she was so kind to me. Miss Marple nodded, kind but desperate. She stood to lose her inheritance too. She helped Edward, providing the car and information about Ruby's movements. Slack shook his head, marveling. And Basil Blake, the artist. A red herring, Miss Marple said. His sketch of Ruby was personal, but innocent. The chemical smell in his studio was paint thinner, not evidence. He loved Ruby, in his way, but he's no killer. Back in St. Mary Mead, Miss Marple sat, with Dolly Bantry in Gossington Hall's drawing room, the fire casting a warm glow. The police had arrested Adelaide Jefferson, who'd confessed to aiding Edward, driven by fear of losing her status. Conway Jefferson, heartbroken but resolute, had restored his original will, ensuring Ruby's memory was honored. Dolly poured tea, her hands steady for the first time in weeks. Jane, you've saved us all, she said, her voice warm. The village is calling you a miracle. But why our library? Why us, Miss Marple's? Needles clicked, her eyes distant. Edward chose your library to cast suspicion on Arthur, knowing the letter would deepen the misdirection. It was personal here, envied your stability, your place in the village. But he underestimated the power of small things, a clasp, an earring. A ticket stub. Dolly smiled, setting her cup down. You see those small things, Jane, where the rest of us see chaos. Miss Marple's lips twitched, her voice soft. People are like knitting, Dolly. Every stitch matters, and a single dropped one can unravel the whole pattern. As the fire crackled, Miss Marple gazed out at the quiet village, The web of secrets now unravelled. Ruby and Pamela were gone, but their deaths had revealed the truth, thread by thread. She murmured, almost to herself, "The spider spins a clever web, but it's the loose threads that catch him."